Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a place where frost bites harder than wolves, wind becomes your closest enemy, and you're only a few missed firewood runs away from not waking up. You've got no central heating, no thermostat, and maybe not even a working chimney. Welcome to a winter on the American frontier, where fire isn't guaranteed and survival comes down to grit, wool, and very questionable insulation techniques. And just so we're clear, you probably won't survive this. But hey, we're here to imagine the cozy, or not so cozy, details together. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I don't want ghost subscribers haunting my algorithm. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city and time in the comments. Always cool to see who's tuning in from a 70-degree beach town while we freeze to death in an 1800s Nebraska dugout. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with the sky turning metallic grey in the early afternoon. One of those clouds-heavy days where everything feels muffled, like the world is bracing for something. You can't see the sun, and the cold starts creeping up through your boots even while you're chopping wood. The calendar says October, but winter doesn't care what your planner says. On the frontier, it's always ahead of schedule, and it's always meaner than you remember. You're part of a family of 5, maybe 6, crammed into a one-room cabin barely larger than a modern living room. The walls are rough-hewn logs, chinked with clay and straw, though half the stuffing has fallen out since last spring. Your roof? Wood shingles leaky as sin, and you just got the first sign of trouble. A north wind sharp enough to slice through wool. The potatoes aren't even all dug up yet. You've still got apples out in the barn loft, waiting to be wrapped in newspaper for storage. The chimney? Cracked near the base. You noticed it last week. But there's been no time, no mortar, no strength left in your back to fix it. But now snow is falling, not gently, not prettily. It's a sideways kind of fall, driven by wind that moans through every gap in the walls. You've heard the old-timers say it's the early storms that get you. The ones that come before you're ready. Before you've got all the firewood in. Before the cellar's sealed and the last roof patches nailed. That's what this feels like. Your fire is low, mostly embers under ash. You're rationing wood because the pile out back is small enough to count by hand. Chopping more now would mean trudging out into the dark woods, slipping on wet leaves and ice-slick roots with a dull axe. And let's not pretend you're not afraid of what might be out there after dusk, not wolves, those you could handle. You're more afraid of frost and your own exhaustion. You grab the baby from the cradle and wrap her in your coat. She's not even crying, just stiff and too quiet. That's worse. Your wife wraps quilts around the younger kids, tucks them tight into the corner of the room farthest from the door, and you all settle in. Not for sleep exactly, but for the long, thin hours between nightfall and dawn. When the world goes quiet and cold presses in through the floorboards, this is the first real winter storm, but it already feels like the cabin is shrinking. You try not to think about how many weeks you have left. Try not to think about last year, when the neighbours down the ridge lost their youngest, found frozen stiff in the corner after a chimney collapse. You try not to think about how your own toes don't feel right. Out here, survival isn't dramatic, it's just relentless. It's noticing too late that you've stopped shivering, because that's not a good sign. It's measuring the firewood in days, not logs. It's feeding the kids first, even if you're dizzy from skipping dinner again. The only warmth in the room is shared body heat and the occasional laugh. Because yes, even now you can laugh. It's absurd how cold it is. So cold that your breath freezes in mid-air. So cold the ink in your journal cracked last year. So cold that if you spit outside it crackles before it hits the ground. Historically it wasn't uncommon for frontier families to face these conditions. Weather reports weren't a thing, and your only forecast came from aching joints and darkening skies. You lived in constant fear of the unexpected blizzard, like the infamous Children's Blizzard of 1888, where temperatures dropped 40 degrees in minutes and hundreds died trying to get home. Imagine being caught in that without warning, no backup heat source and no real insulation between you and the outside. And yet, there are the strange little hacks people swore by, like stuffing corn husks into their clothes. Or the old belief that if you warmed a brick in the coals and wrapped it in cloth, it could keep your feet warm all night. It's not elegant, but it beats frostbite. Speaking of which, there were wild remedies, like rubbing snow on frostbitten limbs to slowly thaw them. Doctors today say that's nonsense, but back then, it was better than nothing. And then there's debate. Always a debate. about whether life in those days was really as brutal as it sounds. Some historians argue that people were simply better acclimated, that they'd layered so consistently and lived so frugally that their bodies adjusted. Others think nostalgia clouds the facts, that it was as miserable as it seems, but stories got softened over time. One thing's for sure, no matter how much you prepared, winter could still gut you. And tonight is just the beginning. Snow is piling up against the door. You're already down to half the flour and maybe 2 eggs if you're lucky. The wind howls like something angry and the walls creak like they're considering collapse. You pull the blanket tighter and wait for dawn, hoping tomorrow will bring sun. Or at least less wind. But tomorrow's another guessing game. And without fire, all you've got is each other. By morning, the fire is nothing but a grey scar in the hearth, barely warm to the touch. You scrape the ashes aside, praying for a surviving coal, some faint orange glow in the powdery bed. Nothing. It's cold dead. So now you face the most humiliating and dangerous task of all. Restarting a fire with almost no kindling, no real fuel, and fingers that don't fully respond to commands. You hold your breath as you strike flint to steel, watching sparks fizzle on damp shavings of birch bark. If it doesn't catch, you'll lose more than warmth. You'll lose hope. And out here, that might be worse. Your wife crouches near you, cupping her hands to protect the infant's face. She's swaddled in every available cloth scrap, with one mitten-sized sock stretched over her head like a bonnet. The older kids are still curled together under a pile of moth-eaten quilts. No one wants to get up, and no one can be blamed. The cold hangs in the air like a weight. Even your breath is slow, reluctant. There's no rush. It's not like there's warmth waiting for you anywhere else in the cabin. Eventually a spark takes. The bark smoulders. You nurse it like it's a newborn chick, coaxing life from something that barely wants to be alive. You add dry moss and a few sticks saved in a covered tin box, your emergency stash. This is why you always save a little back. Frontier rule number 1, never trust the fire to make it through the night. But even with the flame revived, you face a darker truth. There just isn't enough wood. You burned too much in early fall when the weather teased you with cold mornings and mild afternoons. You didn't think the freeze would come this early. No one did. Now you're stuck rationing twigs and praying the axe holds out. You step outside to assess the damage. The door sticks from ice build-up, and when it finally swings open, a gust slaps you full in the face. The snow isn't deep yet, but it's hard and crusted, glittering like shards of broken glass. Your breath leaves in puffs, immediately torn away by the wind. The firewood stack is a joke, maybe enough for 2 days if you burn conservatively, and that's only if the temperatures don't drop further, which of course they will. The problem is deeper than quantity, it's also access. The woodpile is iced over, each log locked to the next with a frozen seal that makes you curse with every yank. You try to carry in a few at a time, but the wind fights you every step back to the cabin. You're exhausted before breakfast, though breakfast is a stretch. A chunk of cornbread and a cold-boiled potato split between all of you. See, fire on the frontier wasn't just about comfort. It was survival. No fire meant no heat, sure, but also no cooking, no water, because good luck drinking anything not frozen, and no way to dry out soaked boots or gloves. And yet, firewood was a finite resource unless you had time, tools and energy to gather more, which you rarely had once snow arrived. In leaner winters, families relied on creative heating strategies when firewood ran low. Heated rocks were a classic, placed in the hearth, warmed for hours, then wrapped in cloth and used like hot water bottles in bed. If you were lucky enough to have bricks, same deal. You'd shove one at the foot of the mattress, warm your back against it, and pretend your teeth weren't still chattering. But there were darker stories too. Stories of families who burned furniture. Burned fences. Some burned their barns if the animals had already frozen or starved. You don't talk about that stuff in front of the kids, but you've heard the tales. They hang around like the smell of burned pork fat. Unpleasant, stubborn, and hard to ignore. Quirky as it sounds, some even resorted to burning dried animal dung, buffalo chips or cow patties. It smelled awful, but it burned hot enough to cook, if not quite to warm a room. You wouldn't tell someone from back east that you burned poop for breakfast fire, but out here, nobody judged. Heat was heat. This whole system of firewood survival started months ago, of course, back when the days were long and hot and your axe felt lighter. Ideally, you'd have chopped and stacked a winter's worth by September. A full cord of wood was considered the bare minimum for survival. Some families went for 3 or 4, but cutting, hauling and splitting all that by hand with nothing but a dull blade and sore muscles wasn't always realistic. especially if you also had crops, livestock, repairs, and kids crawling all over. Some settlers invested in what they called greenwood insurance, fresh-cut logs that wouldn't burn well until spring but served as psychological comfort. It felt good knowing there was something, even if it smoked and hissed like a snake when you tossed it on the fire. Historians still argue how common wood shortages really were. Some say we overplay the hardship, that most families planned ahead and stockpiled responsibly. But you've lived through enough winters now to know planning doesn't guarantee anything. A couple of extra storms, a broken axe handle, an unexpected illness, and suddenly your perfectly calculated cord and a half isn't enough. Winter eats plans for breakfast, and tonight it's eating yours. By sunset, the wind picks up again. You've already been outside 3 times just to drag in logs one at a time, but your hands are done. They're red, raw, and barely gripping the door handle anymore. Your oldest boy offers to help. He's only 10, but you nod. You hate sending him out. But you also hate the look in his eyes when you say no, as if he can see the end before you say it out loud. The embers glow again, steady this time, and you manage to boil water for a stew made from dried beans and scraps of salt pork. The smell is glorious, greasy and earthy and rich, everything your bones crave. You sit with your back to the fire, passing the bowl carefully, letting the kids eat first. You'll get yours later. You always do. Later in the dark, with the stew pot scraped clean and your wood count down to 7 pieces, you lie awake under the quilts. Every creak of the cabin feels like a threat. Every breeze through the chinks is a betrayal. You hold your wife's hand under the covers, cold fingers twining together, and listen to the fire sputter as it fights to stay alive. You whisper to yourself, just make it through tonight. Then you realise you said that last night too. When people back east hear the word dugout, they probably picture baseball. But out here, on the wind-flattened plains where trees are rare and winters laugh at your cosy little log cabin dreams, a dugout is home. And tonight, as the wind cuts like knives through the boards of your barely standing cabin, you remember with a twinge of envy the neighbour a mile off who had the sense to carve into a hillside. It might be a glorified cave, but a cave doesn't shake in the wind, a cave doesn't leak through the roof, and more importantly, a cave stays warm. You've been inside one before. The whole thing was maybe 12 feet wide, 8 feet deep, and barely tall enough to stand upright in, but it felt like a fortress. The thick earth overhead, packed with layers of sod and rooted grass, absorbed the cold like a sponge. No drafts, no rattling windows, just the earthy scent of soil and a deep insulated silence that no blizzard could touch. Your own cabin, by comparison, feels like a loosely held stack of Lincoln logs. Settlers didn't build dugouts because they were pretty. They built them because lumber was precious and weather was cruel. Some didn't even have enough boards for a front door, just a blanket or an old wagon canvas nailed up to keep the wind out. But inside was stable. Inside didn't creak like it was begging for mercy. And in the dead of winter, stability is everything. You think back to when you first built your cabin. It was July, the air thick with gnats, your hands blistered from stripping bark and hammering pegs. The ground was so dry it cracked like old leather. You chose the high ground for drainage, not knowing it would also expose you to every wind and snowdrift that winter could hurl your way. You had options, could have carved into the bluff or even built a hybrid half dugout, half above ground structure. But pride got the better of you. You wanted something that looked like a home, not a hole. Now you wonder if the hole would have been smarter. Out on the plains, sod houses weren't just common, they were the default. If you arrived with a wagon, a shovel and no lumber in sight, what else could you do? You cut blocks of prairie sod thick with roots and clay and stacked them like bricks. The walls held surprisingly well, at least until a good hard rain tried to melt them back into the ground. Still, in winter, sod held heat better than timber. It might have crumbled at the corners, and sure, you might have had the occasional snake or rodent pay a visit through the earthen walls, but the temperature inside often stayed above freezing without needing a fire all night. It's one of those weird frontier trade-offs. Would you rather be warm with worms or cold with dignity? Some folks went even further underground. True dugouts were fully recessed into hillsides, with only the front wall exposed. The door faced south, if you had any sense, to catch what little sun winter had to offer. Inside you might have a simple hearth, a dirt floor, a few shelves punched into the walls with a knife. Not fancy, but warm, and that's what counted. A few feet of packed dirt between you and the elements could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite. There's a story you heard once about a family of 6 living in a dugout during the Great Blizzard of 1886. For 3 days, the storm howled like a living thing, tearing fences from the ground and burying livestock where they stood. The snow drifted over the dugout completely, turning it invisible from the outside. They might have died in there, suffocating quietly under 6 feet of snow, but one of the kids had taken a stick and jammed it through the chimney before the worst hit. That little trick saved them, kept the smoke flowing just enough to stay warm without choking. A bizarre fact, sure, but not unusual. People out here improvised like their lives depended on it, because they did. The debate still rages in historical circles about whether dugouts were practical long-term solutions or just desperate stopgaps. Some scholars argue that families who lived in dugouts were stuck in poverty cycles, unable to afford real homes. Others point out that many chose dugouts for their thermal efficiency and speed. They could be built in days with zero cost, and modified later into root cellars or animal shelters once a proper house replaced them. Function over form, but out here you don't care much about academic debates. You care about whether your kids wake up with all 10 fingers still pink. You care about whether the wind rattling the eaves tonight is going to peel off your roof or just tease it. You care about surviving one more week, not architectural prestige. If you had to do it again, you'd dig. You'd take that shovel and tear into the side of that hill like it owed you money. You'd embrace the weirdness, let the dirt pack in around you, keep your family low and hidden from the worst of the cold. But you didn't. So now, tonight, you're wrapped in layers of everything you own, praying the fire doesn't die before sunrise. You shift your feet half asleep and feel how the cold floor has crept through the quilt. Your youngest is snoring gently in the crook of your arm, her little fingers curled against your chest. You wonder what it would take to start digging a shelter this late in the season. Ground's probably frozen solid already. It's too late anyway. The funny thing is, a sod home wouldn't even seem that strange now. You've learnt to adjust your sense of normal out here. If it keeps you warm and doesn't collapse, it's good enough. If the wind doesn't reach your bones, you call it home. You lie there, eyes on the dark ceiling, listening to the wind scream like something ancient and angry. You imagine the earth, homes, silent and calm beneath the hills. Imagine the warm, still air, thick with the smell of soil and dry straw. Imagine what it might have felt like, waking up in one of those. Then the fire cracks, and you remember exactly where you are. You don't take your clothes off anymore. Not to sleep, not to wash, not unless there's a medical emergency or an infestation. You don't even think about it. The idea of getting undressed, of removing any layer, even for a minute, feels reckless. Like opening a window during a hurricane or standing under a tree in a lightning storm. Every stitch of fabric is precious. Every layer is a line of defense between your skin and a night that wants to bite right through you. Getting dressed in the morning is less about fashion and more like assembling armour. First the long underwear, scratchy but vital. Then the wool shirt, patched and stiff, smelling faintly of sweat and smoke. Over that a thicker jacket if it's not too stiff with last night's frost. Then your trousers, canvas or homespun wool if you're lucky, burlap if you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Socks, 2 pairs if you have them, one shoved inside the other, neither truly dry. And the boots, frozen into shape over the night, must be warmed by the fire before they'll even accept your feet. Sleepwear? That's adorable. Your pyjamas or whatever you wore during the day. Maybe with an extra scarf wrapped around your head and neck. Maybe not. There's no point in undressing. The second you strip down, the cold moves in like a loan shark. The only acceptable time to change is when you're sure the fire's high and steady, or when you're so soaked in sweat from chopping wood that staying in those clothes is worse than braving the freeze. Bathing? No one's had a real bath since late September. It's not that you don't want to be clean, it's just that water doesn't stay liquid long enough to be useful, and stripping down to your birthday suit in these temperatures is a fast track to pneumonia. Or worse. Instead, you rely on dry scrubbing, your occasional heated towel, and sheer willpower. Hygiene becomes a strategic game. Do I really need to wash my hair today? Or can I just braid it tighter and hope the smell doesn't turn into a personality trait? Some women wore up to 7 layers on their upper body alone during winter. Corsets loosened, petticoats layered like onion skins, and outer garments so stiff from cold they practically stood on their own. Men weren't much better off, often layering until their arms barely bent. You've seen your neighbour Henry out hauling buckets looking like a walking hay bale, so puffed up in wool, flannel, and hand-sewn leather that he couldn't scratch his nose if his life depended on it. And yet, it wasn't just about heat, it was about preservation. You wore your clothes like insulation, true, but also like armour against the unpredictability of frontier life. If you passed out in the woods while gathering firewood, your layers might be the only thing that kept you from freezing solid before someone found you. If you got caught in a snow squall between the barn and the house, that wool coat might be the difference between numb fingers and no fingers. The fabrics mattered. Wool, of course, was king. It didn't just trap heat, it kept insulating even when wet. Cotton was for summer. Linen was for the fancy people back east. Out here it was wool or bust, and not the soft merino kind either. We're talking itchy, heavy, hand-spun wool, made from your own sheep if you were lucky enough to have a few that didn't keel over at the first cold snap. There were folk beliefs tied to all this layering too. Some thought that sleeping with your hat on could trap bad dreams. Others believed that if you sweated too much under your layers, it meant the devil was near. You've heard old Mrs. Pollard swear up and down that wearing red flannel next to your skin kept your blood warm and your mind clear. Was it true? Who knows? But out here, truth is whatever gets you through the night. There's still debate among historians about how bad winter hygiene really was. Some claim frontier folk were dirtier than we can imagine, filthy, lice-ridden, and practically marinating in their own sweat. Others argue that while full baths were rare, people stayed decently clean by period standards using snow rub-downs, heated basins, and homemade lye soap. Either way, there's no arguing the result. Come spring, you shed your winter clothes like a snake shedding skin, and if you were lucky, you didn't find anything living in them. At night, you sleep fully clothed, boots at the ready beside your bedroll. It's not romantic or dramatic. It's just what you do. The entire family, parents, kids, sometimes even the dog, all sleep in one heap, tangled under every blanket, pelt and coat you own. The dog is not optional, by the way. She's as much a heat source as she is a pet. Her warm body pressed against your legs keeps your feet from going numb. She doesn't seem to mind. She's just happy to be allowed on the bed. The real terror is waking up sweating, because that means you overdressed. That means you'll start to cool too fast when the fire burns low and sweat becomes your enemy. Wet clothes steal heat faster than anything. You've had nights where you woke up drenched, stripped off a shirt or two in a half-asleep panic, and then regretted it instantly when the chill found the wet spot and settled in like a curse. It's a delicate dance. Too many layers and you'll cook, then freeze. Too few, and you won't make it till morning. Some of your neighbours brag about sleeping without fire at all. They say if you layer right, pile enough bodies in one bed and wrap your head properly, you can sleep through even a hard frost with nothing but shared warmth and a quilt or two. You've tried it, it's possible, but it's not pleasant. You wake up stiff, clammy, and with a layer of frost on your eyebrows. There's something eerie about watching your family sleep, all bundled up like a pile of forgotten laundry, their breath rising in white wisps. You watch the fire glow low, hear the wind crawl along the roofline, and know that the only reason you're still alive is because you haven't let the cold win yet. And as you drift off again, you mutter the quiet frontier mantra that gets you through every night. Don't undress. Don't unlayer. Don't get comfortable. There's a grim art to cooking in a cabin without reliable fire. You don't realise how much you depend on steady heat until you don't have it. Out here, dinner is less about recipes and more about strategy. Specifically, how long you can coax a dying flame into warming anything edible. Some nights even that's a stretch. Because when you don't have much wood and your fire's on life support, the kitchen becomes a place of cold improvisation and low expectations. You wake up hungry, again, but there's no question of a hot breakfast. The fire is barely embers, and you're not going to waste your dwindling kindling stash just to warm up mush. Instead, you gnaw on a piece of yesterday's cornbread, now dry enough to file your teeth down. The butter, if you had any left, would be a frozen brick in the root cellar, but you don't, so the point is moot. Cooking without fire means getting creative. One trick you've learned is to heat flat stones in what little flame you can muster, then use them like a makeshift griddle. It's slow and the surface is uneven, but it beats eating raw dough. You remember hearing someone once say that if your pan is cold, your heart is colder. That might have been a metaphor in other times, but here, it's a Tuesday. Your stew pot, a dented black kettle passed down from who knows where, is the most valuable item in the cabin. Not because it's fancy, it's absolutely not, but because it can hang over a whisper of flame and still work its magic. The old iron keeps heat long after the coals die down. Some nights after dinner, you leave it by the hearth, filled with water and what scraps you can find, bones, onion skins, a pinch of salt, hoping it'll still be warm in the morning. You can't afford waste. Even warmth in the pot is a kind of currency. When you do manage to cook, the smell is intoxicating, not in a romantic Martha Stewart way, more in a primal, blood-stirring, I haven't smelled food in 2 days kind of way. The scent of boiling beans or pork fat, even just warmed up molasses, pulls the family to the hearth like moths. You catch your kids standing there, glassy-eyed, holding tin bowls like worshippers. And when the food's gone, always too soon, they sit back, rubbing their bellies like they've been to a feast, even if all they had was broth with a biscuit floating in it. Back east, they have kitchens with walls and pantry shelves and chimneys that don't leak smoke into your face every time the wind shifts. You've got a fire pit, some hooks, and a pile of grimy cloths. Your wife keeps things as clean as she can, but without fire, water freezes in the basin by noon. And even if you manage to melt some snow, it's never enough to do more than rinse. Sometimes, to stretch the heat, you cook using Dutch oven stacking, burying a lidded pot into the ashes and banking it with coals or hot rocks. It's not fast, but it works. Bread comes out uneven and dense, but it's bread. Beans softened enough to chew. You've even managed to roast a squirrel that way once. It wasn't good, but it was meat. Some folks had what they called a reflector oven, basically a tin contraption angled to catch heat from the fire and bake biscuits or johnny cakes in the open air. You've tried making one from scrap. It mostly just blackened the outside and left the inside raw. Still, you ate every bite. There's a fringe story you once heard, probably tall tale, about a man who cooked porridge over a candle when his wood ran out. Stirred it for hours, they say, feeding the flame bits of his wife's knitting until they had just enough to survive the blizzard. Maybe that's apocryphal, but honestly, you believe it. Hunger changes the rules. You start thinking about calories in everything, buttons, furniture glue, the leather on your boots. And if you've got a fire, even a small one, suddenly your table's full. Without fire, even simple food is out of reach. Ever try cracking a frozen egg without smashing it to pieces? Or peeling a potato that's half frostbitten? You have. Many times. You know what it's like to chip at frozen lard with a knife that's too dull to cut through butter, let alone a slab of pig fat turned to stone. You know how to soften dry beans in a pocket near the fire all day before even trying to cook them. You've cradled carrots under your arms like newborns just to get them soft enough to slice. People always think starvation is dramatic, like a slow fade to black. But mostly it's boring. It's a drawn-out game of rationing and wishing and watching your belt notch creep closer to the last hole. It's a gnawing emptiness that doesn't scream but whispers constantly, there's not enough. Historians argue about how malnourished frontier families really were. Diaries from the era mention hard times, but not always starvation. That's probably pride talking. Nobody wants to write "my kids are hungry" in their journal. But you've seen the look in your wife's eye when the stew pot is nearly empty. You've felt the growing silence in the cabin when the food stretches thinner each week. You don't need a historian to tell you what hunger feels like, and yet you make do. You gather up scrups, you warm rocks, you smother flames early so you can save wood for dinner. You tear off bits of your own quilt to patch a smoke flap that keeps blowing open and letting heat escape. Everything revolves around that fire and the little warmth it promises. Tonight you're lucky. The wind is down, the hearth holds steady. You heat a kettle with bean soup, stir it slow, and listen to the quiet thrum of survival. It's not delicious, it's not filling, but it's warm, and for now that's enough. There's a specific kind of panic that creeps in when you hear the wind whistling around the cabin, and you realise, suddenly and all too clearly, that your windows aren't windows. Not really, just holes in the wall covered with whatever you could find. Maybe it's greased paper, maybe it's old muslin stretched taut and nailed down. Or if you're fancy, or lucky, it's a piece of actual glass you scavenged or bartered for. But even then, it's not enough. Not when the wind starts screeching like a banshee and the temperature drops faster than you can say should have built a dugout. Your windows are the weakest part of the whole structure. The cold zeroes in on them like it knows exactly where to hit. You press your hand near one of them now and feel the air move, sharp, steady, and completely unwelcome. You shove a quilt against it, or maybe a folded feed sack, trying to stop the invisible hand of winter from reaching in. It works for 5 minutes until the wind shifts. Then the draft snakes around the edge and finds a new way in, as it always does. Glass is expensive and rare. Most families couldn't afford proper panes unless they were near a town with a glazier. And even then, it would cost as much as a month's flour. Some use salvaged glass from broken wagons or old houses, cementing the shards together with homemade putty, clay, or even pine resin. But one good gust or a thrown log and it shattered again. So most folks relied on oiled paper, cheap and flexible. You take animal fat, smear it into thin sheets of paper, and let it dry. It lets in a bit of light while keeping out the worst of the cold. Emphasis on bit. The problem is oiled paper doesn't insulate. It's slightly better than nothing, but only slightly. When the cold really settles in, those windows become more symbolic than functional. In daylight, they offer a faint yellow blur of light. At night, they glow dimly from firelight inside, except when they freeze over completely, which happens often. You've woken up to find ice on the inside of the window. Not mist, not frost. Ice. Like nature walked in and licked the walls just to prove a point. And when the wind really howls, the sound it makes through the window seams is enough to rattle your nerves. You've heard your children wake in the dark, convinced it's a monster. And you don't correct them, because in a way it is. To keep the cold out, you do what everyone does, plug the gaps. Quilts nailed over the frames, spare shirts stuffed into the corners. You've even used dung mixed with straw to patch a persistent draft on the north side. You try not to think too hard about what that means when spring comes and everything starts to melt. Right now, it's insulation. In April, it'll be a problem for future you. You've heard tales of people who just sealed their windows shut for the winter, boarded them up completely and lived in darkness to conserve heat. That's not an exaggeration. They'd hammer up planks in late fall and not take them down until the thaw. You've thought about it. Still might, if the next storm comes in hard. Light's not worth much if it comes with a side of hypothermia, but there's also a strange kind of affection for the windows. Even at their worst, they offer some glimpse of the outside world, when it's not covered in snow, that is. During the rare sunny days, you can sit by one, wrapped in 4 layers, and pretend the world is warming up. You watch the trees sway, the occasional rabbit dart across a drift. You imagine what it would be like to stand in sunlight without risking frostbite. Historically, settlers used every material under the sun to glaze their windows. Horn shavings, scraped animal intestines, even thin mica sheets if they could trade for them. Anything semi-transparent and wind-resistant was fair game, but these were always temporary fixes. Nothing really stood up to a Midwest blizzard or a Montana cold snap. When the wind came calling, it didn't knock. It kicked the door in and brought its icy cousins with it. The great debate, of course, is whether the effort to insulate the windows was even worth it. Some argue that the heat loss through walls and floors was far worse, and that sealing up windows just made the inside more miserable and claustrophobic. Others swear by heavy drapes, layered quilts, and the good old-fashioned desperation of a mother with cold children. You fall in the latter group. Every scrap of fabric in the house has been hung, stuffed, or nailed around a window at some point. One of the strangest tricks you learned was from an old Norwegian settler named Ingrid. She told you to hang dried moss soaked in vinegar in the window corners. Keeps out frost and bad spirits, she claimed. The frost part you doubt. The bad spirits, though, hard to say. You did sleep better that winter. Tonight the wind's back. You feel it probing the cracks again, sneaking through like it's mapping your weaknesses. One of the quilts slips, and you rush over to refasten it, hammering the nail back in with the heel of your boot. The kids stir, but don't wake. You press your hand against the wall beside the window. It's cold as stone. You light a candle and watch the flame flicker as air snakes around the edge. It dances, weak and uncertain. You could blow it out with a sigh, but you don't. You let it burn, even though the light hurts your eyes and the wax is nearly gone, because that small flickering flame is the only thing in the room not trying to kill you. You sit down by the window anyway, just for a moment, wrapped in everything you own, shoulders hunched, eyes on the blurry white world outside. You watch the snow drift sideways past your oiled paper square, wondering if the world out there is colder than in here or just quieter. And then the wind groans and the window flaps again, and you're back on your feet, reaching for her more rags, more nails, more anything. The window stays closed, but the cold always finds a way. When night falls and the fire begins to gutter down to a faint smouldering pulse, the only thing left to do is huddle. Not for comfort, not for closeness, for heat. Pure, simple human heat. You don't talk about it like it's a tactic, it just is. Everyone piles into the same bed, or more accurately the same lumpy mattress of straw, quilts, animal hides and old coats. It's not romantic or sweet, it's survival. You sleep like spoons in a drawer, bodies layered in a desperate effort to hoard whatever warmth you managed to trap before the fire gave up. No one sleeps alone in winter, not even out of choice. Solitude is a luxury you can't afford when the temperature indoors is close to the one outside, and the cold doesn't care about personal space, so you all squeeze in, limbs tangled, toes fighting for position under the thickest spot in the blanket pile. There's a system to it, unspoken but understood. Adults on the outside, kids in the middle. The youngest and the frailest get the centre, where the warmth gathers like a secret. And then there's the dog. You don't care if she tracks mud into the house or steals scraps from the stew pot. Come nightfall, she's essential. She curls up at the foot of the bed or wedges herself between whoever's shivering the most. Her breath smells like everything she's ever eaten, and she snores like a drunk uncle, but her body radiates heat like a stove. You've heard stories of frontier families sleeping with chickens under the blankets too, or letting a pig in to warm the floorboards. That one seems like a stretch, but then again you've seen worse ideas born out of frostbite panic. You've stopped feeling embarrassed about it. At first you tried to keep some distance. You even slept on the floor once, giving the kids more space. That lasted exactly one night. Now pride goes out with the last log. You learned quickly, body heat is currency. The more bodies in bed, the richer you are. Of course, that also means enduring the symphony of other people's sleep. The wheezing, the occasional elbow to the face, your son's pointy knees digging into your back, the baby's foot somehow ending up inside your shirt, your wife's hair in your mouth. You trade it all for a heated mattress. Sure, but that's the thing, there's no trade, this is it, so you make the best of it. You breathe together, fall asleep together, and wake up still tangled, stiff, and somehow grateful. The concept of shared sleeping isn't new, not even odd historically. Families all over the world have done it for centuries. Beds were expensive, rooms were rare, and in winter, warmth beat modesty every time. There's even evidence that in especially brutal climates, people took turns sleeping closer to the fire, rotating positions like human meat on a spit. Some historians call it the rotisserie method, not officially, but it fits. Rotate to the heat, don't burn. There's another old custom called warming the bed, where someone, usually the youngest or a servant in richer homes, would go lay in the bed ahead of everyone else to heat it with their body. In your case, it's usually the baby. She's already there, tucked in early, drooling on the only dry patch of blanket. No one's complaining. And then there are the fringe beliefs, the little rituals people swore by to hold on to the warmth. Some placed hot bricks or potatoes at their feet. Others insisted on sleeping with a boiled onion in a sock by the hearth to ward off cold spirits. Your neighbour swears by stuffing newspaper under his shirt before bed. Another told you once that if you rubbed vinegar on your chest, it would pull the cold out through your pores. You tried it. All it did was make your wife gag in the dark. But warmth isn't just physical, there's a kind of strange comfort in these crowded nights. You lie there, unable to move, feeling every twitch and breath around you, and yet it feels safer. The world outside is frozen and hostile, but inside, even in discomfort, there's a shared heartbeat. You think about those living alone, old bachelors or widows too proud to ask for company. You wonder how they do it, if they do it. The thought creeps into your head and stays there longer than you like. There's a silence that comes in winter nights that's different from summer. It's heavier. Not peaceful, more like watchful. The kind of quiet that makes you think you're being observed by the cold itself. You lie awake sometimes, staring into the darkness, feeling it press against the windows, seep through the walls. The only answer is another body breathing slow and steady beside you, reminding you that you're still warm, still alive. Every morning, when you peel yourself out of the quilt pile, you hear the groans of cold joints, the half-laughed curses of people who've been pinned in the same position for hours. You stretch, rub your arms, and check the fire. Always the fire. Then you check each person, fingers, toes, noses. You do it subtly, trying not to wake them. But you do it, just in case. There are stories, of course, always stories, of people who went to sleep in winter and simply didn't wake up. They didn't freeze stiff, not like you'd imagine. It was quieter than that. Just a slow decline, body giving up its heat to the air, breath softening until it stopped. That's why you always sleep close. That's why you make sure no one's alone. You can't stop the cold from coming, but maybe you can make it work harder to take someone. Tonight is colder than last. You can feel it in the way your breath crystallizes faster. How the edges of the quilts are stiff with frost. But everyone's here. The fire is low, but it's alive. The dog has wedged herself under your knees, snoring like a little furnace. Your wife sighs in her sleep, her face buried in your shoulder. The baby makes a soft sound and dribbles on your chest. You smile in the dark. Miserable? Sure. Cramped? Always. But alive and together. You shift just enough to let the blood flow back into your arm and then settle back into the tangle. Let the cold come. You've got your pile. You know it's a different kind of winter when you have to bring the cows inside. Not all of them, of course, just the ones you can't afford to lose. The milk cow mostly. Maybe the calf if it's small enough. The rest either make do in the lean-to or don't make it at all. It sounds absurd until you're faced with the cost of losing your only source of milk, warmth and manure in one frozen swoop. So yes, you shovel out a corner of the cabin, lay down straw and make room for a £1,000 guest who chews cud all night and smells like damp leather and wet hay. Welcome to the reality of winter livestock cohabitation. No, it's not glamorous. But out here, warmth trumps dignity every single time. You remember the first time you did it. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in 2 hours. The wind started howling like it wanted to rip the shingles off the house, and the cow, old Bessie, gentle and dumb, started bawling like she knew what was coming. You opened the back door, tied a rope around her neck, and led her in like a guest of honour. The kids screamed, the dog barked. Your wife gave you that look, but no one stopped you. Not after last year, when you found the neighbour's prize bull frozen standing up. Having livestock indoors sounds worse than it is. Not good, just less bad. The smell is sharp, musky and immediate. But your nose adjusts. You keep straw down, clean what you can, and block off a corner with an old bed frame or crates. And in return, the cow provides radiant heat like a living furnace. Her body keeps the room 5, maybe 10 degrees warmer. That may not sound like much, but 5 degrees is the difference between water and ice, between stiff fingers and working ones, between a night you sleep through and a night you don't wake up from. And she's not the only one. Chickens sometimes come in too. You've had a couple roost on the mantel overnight, huddled up and glassy-eyed. The kids find it hilarious. Your wife, not so much, but you'd rather clean up chicken droppings in the morning than explain to your daughter why her favourite hen turned into a feathery brick outside. Some settlers even let pigs bed down near the fire. That one's tricky. Pigs are warm, sure, but they're also loud, stubborn, and prone to rooting through anything they can reach. You tried it once, spent the next morning retrieving half the pantry, and explaining to your youngest that no, the pig wasn't helping cook. It's not just about warmth, it's about life. When the animals die, they don't just stop being useful, they become liabilities. Their frozen bodies are hard to move, impossible to butcher, and they don't rot in the cold, they just sit there, mute reminders that you gambled wrong. Losing a cow in winter is like losing a lifeline. No milk, no manure for spring planting, no new calf come summer. It's not just a dead animal. It's a future erased. So yes, you bring them in. Historically, it wasn't uncommon for frontier families to share space with livestock during brutal winters. Old European traditions, especially among Scandinavian settlers, included shared barn houses, where humans and animals lived under the same roof, separated only by a low wall or partition. The animal heat helped warm the human quarters, and vice versa. It wasn't romantic or rustic. It was survival design. There's still debate among scholars about how widespread this practice was in North America. Some argue it was only in the most desperate situations, when barns collapsed or temperatures dropped too fast. Others say it was more common than records suggest, because folks didn't exactly brag about bringing a cow into the parlour. Diaries rarely say we invited the hog to tea, but they do mention sharing warmth with the beasts, or keeping the calf near the chimney. And those are the breadcrumbs that fill in the gaps. The oddest part? After a few nights you get used to it. The sounds, the smells, the closeness. You learn to sleep through the wet slap of a tail, the occasional low moo, the rustle of hay as your unexpected roommates shift in their sleep. You find a strange peace in it. The steady sound of breathing, animal and human, becomes comforting. A reminder that for now, life still pulses inside these walls. The kids even start naming them again. Bad idea, but you don't stop it. There's something good in watching them treat the cow like a big dumb dog. They'll stroke her flanks, whisper secrets into her ear. The littlest one tried to teach her to sit. You didn't correct him. Let him have his fun. The cold already took too much. And then there's the heat. Subtle, slow, but undeniable. The air inside the cabin changes after the first night with livestock indoors. It's heavier, warmer. You catch yourself sweating a little in the mornings, peeling off your outer coat. The dog stops curling so tightly against your legs. You hear fewer coughs from the kids. You still have to keep the fire going, of course, But it's no longer your only line of defence. You've got backup, four-legged, grunting backup. But there are limits. You can't bring in everyone. The horses stay in the shed, wrapped in burlap and prayed over. You check them twice a day, breaking ice from their water buckets and shoveling out the snow that creeps in under the warped door. You talk to them like they understand. Maybe they do. Animals know more than we give them credit for. And every morning you sweep out the mess, spread fresh straw, and try to pretend your home doesn't smell like a barn. But deep down you know this is what's keeping you alive. Warmth is warmth. No one out here is going to judge. Tonight, the cow is already in her corner. You've given up trying to keep her off the floorboards, just threw a rug down and called it good. The fire's holding steady, and the kids are curled up beside her, one even using her belly like a pillow. You should probably stop them, but she doesn't mind. Her breath steams in the cold air, soft and rhythmic, like the quiet hiss of a simmering pot. The wind outside howls, but the cabin holds. The temperature doesn't feel quite as cruel tonight. There's a heaviness to the room, not just the smell, but the heat, the shared closeness. The sense of something big and living watching over you. You scratch behind the cow's ear on your way to bed. She flicks her tail in approval. You smile. Tonight, you're not just surviving. You're surviving together. You wake in the dark and already know it is colder than yesterday. It's not the kind of knowledge that comes from seeing your breath or hearing the wind. It's in your bones. The stiffness in your fingers, the ache behind your knees, the way your face feels crusted in frost before you even open your eyes. The fire's out. The dog's curled up tighter than usual. The cow's not making any noise. That's when you realise the worst part. The inside of the cabin is below freezing. Again, you sit up and see it. Frost. Not just clinging to the windows or forming neat little patterns around the corners, but fully coating the inside of the walls. A white dusting on the shelves, shimmering in the weak moonlight leaking through the oiled paper window. The water bucket in the corner, a solid block. The ladle inside it stands straight up, frozen where it was dropped. And your boots, left too close to the door, are stiff as rocks. You're living in an icebox, literally. It sounds like a joke until you realise the cabin has started to preserve things. That piece of bread you left out, still fresh. The dish of stew no one finished last night. Cold enough to store without spoiling. This is the brutal blessing of deep winter. Everything keeps. Your meat doesn't rot. Your milk doesn't sour, if you can thaw it enough to pour. And that jar of jam you were saving for spring? Better hope the glass doesn't crack from the cold before you get to it. You wrap yourself in your coat before stepping out from under the quilts, already dreading the shock of air on your legs. You've started sleeping with your boots tucked inside the bed, pressed near the cow's flank. If you don't, you can't get them on. Not without building a fire just to soften the leather. Same with gloves, hats, even belts. Everything left out overnight becomes rigid, brittle, practically useless. The kids are still asleep, their faces barely visible under the mountain of blankets and rags. Your wife stirs, mutters something, pulls the covers higher. You don't wake them, no point. Until there's heat or food or both. You shuffle over to the hearth and assess the damage. No embers, just a cold grey crater where life used to be. You knew it might happen. The fire was low last night, and you were down to the last few good logs. You were hoping for a miracle. You didn't get one. So now comes the ritual. Scratch together some bark, maybe a bit of kindling if you remember to save it, and hope the flint sparks on the first try. Usually it doesn't. You kneel there, breathing through your teeth, striking again and again, fingers clumsy, watching sparks fizzle into nothing. When it finally catches, it's like watching hope come back to life. Tiny, fragile, flickering. You feed it like a baby bird, terrified it'll go out before it takes hold. Eventually the fire returns. You sit back, exhausted, and let your hands hover near it. The pain comes next, the sting of thawing skin. You know the signs now, the burning, the tingling, the slow transition from numbness to agony. It's a good pain. It means you're still alive. That's what the frost inside the cabin does. It doesn't just test your body, it tests your mind. Every morning it reminds you that the boundary between inside and outside is thinner than you think, that your home is just a glorified wooden box, and the cold doesn't respect walls. There's a grim joke that settlers used to tell. It's warmer in the root cellar. And honestly, some days it's true. The root cellar, dug deep and packed with earth, holds a steadier temperature than your actual living space. Sure, it's damp and crawling with the occasional rat, but it doesn't freeze. Sometimes you consider sleeping down there, just curling up between the potatoes and hoping no one mistakes you for a particularly lumpy squash. You've heard of families in the far north lining their walls with snow intentionally, turning their homes into insulated domes. The science checks out. Snow traps heat, but that only works if your walls are solid and your roof doesn't leak. You've tried to bank the outside of the cabin with drifts, shoveling snow up against the base to plug gaps, but it's temporary at best. One good windstorm and your efforts blow away like powder. There's an ongoing debate in old journals and modern scholarship about whether frontier homes were ever truly warm. Some say they were, if built right, insulated with straw, manure, and double layers of chinking. Others argue that most were never more than a few degrees above freezing into under January, and that the fire only made a bubble of heat that vanished as soon as you moved 2 steps away. Based on the frost forming inside your soup bowl, you'd put your money on the latter. Quirky fact, some people used to hang meat from the rafters inside their homes because it was just as cold indoors as it was in a barn. You've never done it yourself, but you have heard stories of folks cutting slices off frozen venison dangling over the kitchen table. One man even claimed he used his frozen beard as a cutting board. You doubt the last part. Sort of. The strangest part about living in a frozen house is how you adapt. You learn how to move differently, slower, more efficient. You minimise trips across the room. You learn to keep food under the bed to keep it from freezing solid. You wrap your spoon in cloth so it doesn't stick to your lips, and you stop expecting comfort. It's not coming. But there's also this clarity to it. The cold strips everything down. No pretense, no distractions, just survival. You do what you have to, not what you want to. You don't complain, you don't wish for spring, not too loudly. Spring means thaw, but it also means floods, sickness and rot. At least the cold preserves. At least the cold keeps things still. Tonight the frost will come again. You'll watch it creep across the walls, silvery and delicate, like lace drawn by a ghost's fingertip. You'll trace its patterns with your eyes, lying beneath the blankets, counting the cracks in the ceiling, listening to the fire crackle, wondering if the food will last another week. And somehow you'll sleep, because you have to, because tomorrow it all starts again. The wind doesn't just howl out here, it infiltrates. It snakes through the seams in your roof, hisses under the doorframe and dances in swirling currents through cracks so small you can't even see them. You can plug the windows, stuff the keyholes, hang quilts over every doorway like heavy curtains, and it still finds you. It's persistent, mean, personal. You don't fight the wind so much as endure its constant invisible assault. Tonight it's back, in full force. It starts as a distant groan and then builds, climbing over the hills and slamming into the side of the cabin with a fury that makes the timbers tremble. The door rattles in its frame. The rafters hum with the tension. Somewhere above, something loose, maybe a piece of tin or a shingle, flaps with an erratic beat, like a dying bird's wing. You look up at the ceiling and wonder, not for the first time, if the whole thing will come down on you by morning. Wind like this doesn't just make you cold, it makes you feel hunted, like something is out there trying to claw its way in. And to be honest, it's succeeding. You've done everything the old-timers said to do. Every year, before the first snow, you go over the chinking, patching gaps between the logs with mud, straw, even bits of cloth or dried manure. Anything to plug the holes. Some folks use ashes from the fire mixed with pig's blood. You haven't tried that, but you've reached the point where it doesn't sound that weird. Still, it never lasts. One deep freeze and your mud turns brittle, one thaw and it crumbles. The wind doesn't care how hard you worked, it finds the holes anyway. Inside, the walls leak cold. You hang quilts along them, try to make a second layer of insulation. You stuff rags into corners, you pile straw along the baseboards, you line every drafty edge with whatever you can scavenge. And yet you still wake up with your hair frozen to the wall where your head rested in the night. You still see your breath inside the cabin, curling and twisting like it's trying to escape too. The problem isn't just the cold, it's the movement. Drafts create this constant state of unease. You can't get warm, because every time you think you've found a warm spot, a new current snakes in and undoes it. You sit by the fire and feel a chill on the back of your neck. You lie in bed and feel a breeze crawl across your feet. You wear gloves indoors, but the wind makes them useless. You remember a story from an old settler, Mr. Phelps, who said he once spent an entire night lying in bed, arms outstretched, holding blankets against 2 separate leaks while the snow blew in sideways through the walls. By morning, the blanket was frozen to the floor. He said it like a joke, but the look in his eyes told you it wasn't funny. You get it now. There's a fringe belief, superstition, really, that says if you leave a broom propped up by the door, bristles up, it'll confuse the wind and keep it from finding a way in. Something about the broom scrambling the spirit of the storm. Your wife did it once out of desperation. You didn't argue. There's no harm in trying when the wind's already getting inside your soul. You've heard debates about insulation methods on too. What actually worked and what was frontier fantasy. Some historians insist that daub and wattle walls were superior to logs. Others argue that double chinking with natural lime gave better results, especially with south-facing cabins. You've read none of those studies, of course. You just know what doesn't work. Thin walls, single-pane anything, and the belief that a few blankets will do the job alone. And then there's the sound. Wind has a way of getting inside your head. It's not just noise, it's presence. It groans like it's in pain, whistles like it's laughing, moans like something mourning the dead. When it hits just right, it vibrates through the floorboards, rattles the pots hanging near the hearth, and makes the whole house sound like it's about to lift off the ground. One night last year, you sat awake for hours listening to it scream, convinced that someone or something was walking in circles around the cabin. The wind can do that. It carries voices, makes you hear footsteps that aren't there, makes you doubt every creak and sigh of the house. You almost opened the door just to check, but you knew better. Nothing good waits outside in that kind of wind. Nothing human, anyway. You've got towels jammed under the doors now, a row of bricks laid down to reinforce the threshold. Your wife stitched a second layer of canvas across the inside of the door like a curtain, and still the wind pushes through, puffing it inward like a breath from the other side. The only real solution would be to rebuild. Thicker walls, tighter seams, maybe an earth berm or a sod surround. But you don't have the time, the strength, or the season for that. So instead, you patch, you plug, you stuff and press and jam whatever you can into every visible crack. And when you run out of supplies, you use your own body. Sleep in the coldest corner, breathe warm air into your mittens, wrap your coat around the doorframe. Tonight, you're losing the fight. You know it. You feel it. There's a steady stream of air coming through the east wall, and no matter how many rags you cram in, it doesn't stop. The fire is holding barely. The kids are bundled together under the buffalo hide, already asleep. The dog is curled tight into the crook of your legs, ears twitching with every gust. You reach over to the window and press your hand to the edge. The wind's still there, still whispering, still looking for a way in. You close your eyes and pull your coat tighter. Let it howl. You're still here. You never thought you'd get sentimental over manure, but tonight, as you pack a fresh mix of straw and animal droppings into the gaps between the rafters, you find yourself whispering thanks to the cow. Maybe it's the fatigue. Maybe it's the fact that your fingers are too numb to tell where the manure ends and your mittens begin. Either way, you're not ashamed, because in a cabin where the cold seeps through every inch of wall, ceiling and floor, insulation is whatever you can get your hands on. And tonight, it's seeming, pungent, and miraculously warm. The technique's not new. Frontier families have been using every bit of organic material they could gather to seal up their homes for generations. Straw, moss, sawdust, even mammalian newspapers pasted together with flour and water. But manure? That's frontier gold. Mixed with straw, it dries hard like clay and clings to the gaps between logs better than any mud you've slapped up so far. And once it sets, it doesn't just block wind, it holds heat, sort of. Enough to matter. You can almost feel the temperature shift in the room as you plug the last few holes. It's slight, sure, but in this life, slight can be the line between a night of shivering and a few blessed hours of real sleep. You step back, covered in a fine dusting of, well, let's not dwell on it. You wipe your hands on your pants and glance up at your handiwork, feeling a flicker of pride. Not bad for something scooped out of the corner of the cabin. You remember a story your grandfather used to tell, about a family who insulated their walls with corn cobs and wool scraps, layering them like lasagna. It worked well until mice got wind of it and turned their house into a rodent metropolis. You haven't resorted to wool yet, though you've eyed the lining in your coat more than once. It's a quiet battle between warmth now or warmth later. Usually now wins. Some folks took insulation to an art form. You knew a couple, German immigrants, who lined their cabin walls with bricks made of mud, straw and horsehair. They swore it made the place feel like spring year-round. You visited once. They had a rug on the floor and bread rising on a shelf. It smelled like comfort. You think about that a lot these days. Back in your own cabin, the situation isn't quite so elegant. The walls are still drafty. The roof still leaks when the wind blows just right. And you're down to your last bale of straw. But you've learned to stretch things. Old clothes get shredded and stuffed into cracks. A broken pillow becomes insulation for the window frame. You even tore apart an old chair once, pulling out the horsehair stuffing and jamming it into the floorboards. You sat on a stump for 3 weeks after, but your toes thanked you. There's debate, of course, about the best insulating materials of the time. Some argue that the nothing beat moss, light, dry and easy to gather. Others swear by mixtures of clay and lime, but in most of the diaries you've read, or heard snippets of passed down in stories, the real consensus is that you used what you had. Period. Whether that was sawdust from a collapsed barn or the stuffing from your only pillow, insulation wasn't about perfection. It was about desperation. The fringe methods are where things get weird. You once heard about a man who smeared molasses along his windowsill, claiming it trapped the cold like flies. His cabin probably smelled like a gingerbread house, and he likely froze to death while attracting every raccoon in the territory. But you respect the creativity. The line between genius and insanity is pretty blurry when you're watching your breath form icicles in your beard. Tonight, as the fire starts to build again, you sit back and admire the little patchwork world you've created. A ceiling insulated with dried cow droppings. Walls stuffed with old skirts, animal fur and whatever you could tear up without regret. The floor lined with burlap sacks you stitched into place with fishing line. It's not pretty, but it works, sort of. The cabin's still cold, you still wear 2 pairs of socks to bed. The kids still wake up with ice crystals on their eyelashes, but you've bought yourself a little more time, maybe even a little peace, and when the wind rattles the door again, it sounds just a touch less aggressive. That's something people don't tell you about winter insulation. It's not just about keeping the cold out, it's about keeping fear out. Every log you chink, every crack you plug is a small act of control in a season where so little is up to you. It's a way to push back against the silence, the frost, the isolation. You might not be able to stop the cold from coming, but you can at least force it to work a little harder. The cow lets out a sigh in her corner. The dog thumps her tail once and shifts closer to the fire. Your wife hums something under her breath as she pours a ladle of water into a kettle, and the hiss of steam fills the cabin like a lullaby. For a moment it feels almost livable. There's a strange comfort in knowing your home is held together by equal parts grit and animal waste, that your survival depends not just on strength but on ingenuity, stubbornness, and a willingness to get filthy in the name of warmth. You pull a blanket tighter around your shoulders and glance up at the ceiling. The packed manure is drying now, crusting into something solid, something protective. You smile, not because it's beautiful, but because it's yours, built by your hands, held together with whatever this life threw at you. The wind knocks once more, softer this time, as if testing the defences. Let it try. You've got manure in the rafters now. You don't know exactly when frostbite became a regular part of your life. It wasn't sudden. It was a creeping, sneaky thing, like the cold itself, slinking into your fingers and toes during chores, during long walks to the well, during quiet moments where you forgot for just a second to keep moving. Now, every winter morning begins with a toe count. You wiggle each one inside your boots, hoping to feel pain, because pain means blood is still flowing. Numbness? That's when you get nervous. And when it hurts to thaw out? That's when you know you came too close. The fear of frostbite lives in your bones. You're used to it now. You've seen what it does. The neighbour down the ridge, Samuel, lost the tops of 2 fingers last winter. He didn't even realise they were gone until he warmed his hands by the fire and one of them started dripping. Blackened. Dead. Just fell off like a leaf. You helped him wrap the stumps in boiled cloth. He didn't scream, just stared at them like they belonged to someone else. That's how it gets you. Quiet, cruel and fast. There's no medical help out here. No hospital, no doctor with a fancy bag full of miracle salves, just root cures and prayers. The old women say to rub snow on frostbitten flesh to wake it up. Others say to plunge your hands into warm, not hot, water and stir until the colour returns. One man you met swore his mother made a paste from boiled onions and bear grease. He couldn't tell you if it worked. He still limped like his toes were made of glass. You've tried it all. Onion poultices, warm cloths, even holding your hands under the cow's belly until the feeling came back. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. You've learned to live with the risk. You wear extra socks, double mittens, wool over cotton. Never cotton over wool. You never go outside without moving. Standing still is a death sentence in January. You teach the kids the same rules. They think it's a game. Keep walking, keep stomping, keep swinging your arms like you're fighting off ghosts. But deep down you know better. Frostbite is a frontier villain no one sees coming. It doesn't announce itself. No sharp pain, no dramatic moment. Just a quiet tingle, like your hand's fallen asleep. And then, nothing. If you're lucky, you catch it in time. If you're not, you lose something. Historically, it wasn't uncommon. Soldiers in the Civil War wrote letters home about losing their toes in the snow during marches. Trappers kept journals filled with gory details about blackened ears and frozen feet. Some even chewed their own mittens when the pain got too bad. They didn't write that down, of course, but the stories passed through the camps like wildfire. There's a strange superstitious layer to it too. Some settlers believed frostbite was punishment. From God, from spirits, from not respecting the cold. There were tales of people who'd mocked winter, or bragged about walking barefoot in snow, only to lose a foot a week later. One story tells of a man who refused to bundle his ears because he thought it made him look weak. He died that spring from a fever that started with frostbitten cartilage and ended in gangrene. You don't know if it's true, but you keep your ears wrapped anyway. Tonight your fingers are throbbing. You took too long chopping wood, and even though you were moving the whole time, the wind was worse than you realised. You didn't notice until you came inside and tried to unlace your boots, couldn't feel the laces, couldn't feel the boots, just stiff meat where your hands should have been. You're better now, sitting by the fire with your hands wrapped in warm cloth. The pain is back, it burns, it stabs, you take it as a good sign. There's still debate about whether early settlers understood frostbite in any real medical sense. Some say they thought of it like a burn, treatable with cool compresses and rest. Others argue they ignored it until it became unavoidable. You lean toward the latter. Out here, most ailments are treated with stubbornness until they either go away or take something with them. It's not noble, it's just reality. The weirdest story you've heard came from a trapper up north. He claimed he lost part of his nose to frostbite and tried to sew a piece of rabbit fur over the spot. Better than nothing, he said, tapping the patch like a badge. You believed him, not because he seemed trustworthy, but because he didn't laugh when he told you. Out here, sometimes better than nothing is as good as you get. You teach the kids to watch their skin. Red is okay, white is bad, blue is worse. You tell them to tell you if anything goes numb. Pain is good, you say. Like a mantra. Pain means it's still alive. They repeat it back to you. Half mocking, half true. They know. They've seen you flinch when you thaw your feet. They've heard the stories. Your wife keeps the salves close, pine resin and tallow. Bear fat when you can get it. Aloe, in the summer dried and stored like gold. She rubs it into your fingers now, whispering under her breath like the words will help. Maybe they do. And in the middle of all this hold, all this frostbite, there's still some part of you that's grateful. Grateful it was your hands this time, not your child's. Grateful you still have toes. Grateful the wind didn't win. The fire is steady now. The cabin smells of smoke, wet wool, and something slightly singed. Your fingers throb, but you curl them one by one. You flex them, counting out the pain. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all there, all yours. You look out the window where the frost clings to the glass like a warning. Tomorrow it will come again. But tonight, you still have all your fingers. Wool isn't just a fabric out here. It's a lifeline, a second skin, a form of currency. A barrier between you and the kind of cold that doesn't knock but walks straight through your walls like it owns the place. When the wind howls and the fire sputters, and even the cow huddled in the corner starts shivering, wool is what keeps your bones from cracking. It's scratchy, heavy and never quite dry, but it's the reason your heart is still beating on nights like this. You've learned to love it, or at least respect it in all its forms. Wool blankets, wool shirts, wool mittens, wool socks layered over wool foot wraps. Even the holes and patches are familiar now. You know which spot on your left sleeve always curls up, which sock has the threadbare heel, and which blanket was once a shawl before it got restitched into its third life. Wool doesn't die, it just transforms. There's a particular blanket that you keep folded under the bed during the day. Thick as your forearm and the colour of oatmeal, it smells faintly of smoke and sheep and something herbal, maybe pine resin. Your mother sent it out years ago, wrapped in brown paper and prayer. It was too nice to use at first. Now it's your roof when the roof fails, your second fire when the first one dies. You don't share it, not out of selfishness, but because it's just enough to keep one body warm through a night of creaking walls and frostbitten windows. Historically, wool was one of the few materials frontier families could rely on, when the mercury dropped and firewood ran out. It's insulating even when wet, one of its small miracles, and resistant to wind to a degree. Better yet, if you had sheep, you could make more of it yourself, though that process was slow and backbreaking. Shear the sheep, wash the fleece, card it, spin it, dye it if you were fancy, then knit, crochet, or weave it into something vaguely blanket-shaped. 6 months of labour for one garment that might be too tight or too itchy, but still better than anything else you owned. Some frontier families organised wool pooling days where several households would combine what they had and work together to spin and sew. You remember attending one years ago, before you built this cabin. The barn smelled of lanolin and laughter, and the rhythm of spinning wheels kept time like music. By the end, everyone left with a blanket or a sweater. You still have yours, barely holding together now, but too valuable to toss. There's debate among textile historians, yes, they exist, about which wool-producing breeds were the most common on the frontier. Merino gets most of the glory now, but you never saw a merino sheep out here. Hardy breeds, coarse-haired and big-boned, were better suited to the cold, the predators, the rough terrain. Their wool wasn't soft, it didn't feel like a hug, but it held warmth like a secret. That's all that mattered. Wool wasn't just for clothes either. You've used it to seal door gaps, line shoes, stuff pillows. You've wrapped hot stones in it to make impromptu bed warmers. You've cut strips of it to tie around your knees when they started locking up from the cold. You even saw someone try to make a curtain out of old wool trousers once. It looked like a crime, but it worked. Then there are the old folk beliefs. Of course there are. Some people claimed that wool soaked in moonlight and worn around the neck would protect you from lung sickness. Others believed that burying a piece of unwashed wool near the hearth would lock in heat for the season. You can't say whether any of that works, but you did leave a strip of wool under your mattress once during a particularly bad cold snap. You didn't die, so there's that. You try to keep a wool kit near the hearth. Spare socks, a scarf, a knit cap, even an old pair of mittens your wife patched 12 times. It's your emergency bundle, the final layer before you give up and sleep standing up in front of the fire like a log. You've used it more than once. You've wrapped your hands in socks just to cook breakfast. You've worn the scarf like a sash just to keep your middle warm. If you wrapped yourself in every piece of wool you owned, you might look like a walking laundry line, but you'd be the warmest fool in the county. And yet wool isn't invincible. When it gets wet, truly soaked, it can smell like an entire barnyard. Drying it is a nightmare. You can't hang it outside because it'll freeze solid. You can't leave it too close to the fire because it might scorch or smoke, so you drape it strategically. Over chairs, across rafters, on yourself. Sometimes you wear it half damp because less freezing still beats fully frozen. One of the strangest facts you've heard is that some settlers deliberately shrank their wool clothes on purpose to make them denser and warmer. They'd dunk a sweater in hot water, then beat it with a paddle until it fit their torso like a second skin. You've tried that. Once. You still can't raise your arms past your shoulders in that sweater, but by God it's warm. Tonight you wrap your legs in a wool throw and sit by the fire checking the socks you hung to dry. They're still damp. Of course they are, but they're better than frozen. You tuck a pair into your coat to keep them warm with body heat. Your wife rolls her eyes. You tell her it's science. The kids sleep beneath wool layers so heavy they can barely turn over. That's good. You want them pinned like burritos. The dog curls against the hearth, belly toward the warmth, her back draped with your oldest wool coat. She hasn't moved in hours. The fire pops, the wind scratches at the window, and you sit there, grateful for every scratchy thread in your life. Grateful for sheep, grateful for your mother, who somehow knew the mail-order blanket would become your most valuable possession. Grateful for anything that stands between you and the cold, because fire dies, wood runs out, but wool stays. You stare into the candle flame like it owes you money. It's your only light tonight. Just one stubby thing stuck in an old tin can, its base melted flat so it doesn't tip. The fire's burned low and you're saving what wood you have for the morning. The lantern ran dry yesterday, and you haven't got a spare wick. So now it's you and this flickering little candle, throwing shadows that dance across the walls like ghosts with bad timing. It's dim, but enough. Just barely enough, until it starts to lean. You lunge for it just as the wax gives out on one side, and the whole thing tilts in its pool of melted slop. A splash of wax hits your hand, and the flame wobbles, then steadies, looking smug. You curse under your breath and reposition the can, pushing it deeper into the hearthstones. One gust, one wrong move, and this thing could tip again, right into a pile of kindling, or worse, the rag pile near the door. You've seen what fire can do to a home like yours, you've read the stories, you've smelled the aftermath. That's the irony, isn't it? Fire is your best friend and your worst enemy. Without it, you die. With too much of it, or the wrong kind at the wrong time, you die faster. So you ration flame like a miser counts coins, one candle at a time, one log on the fire, one match per day if you can help it. You don't light anything you can't watch with both eyes. You don't let the kids near open flame unless you're right there with a bucket of water and a look that could wither trees. You've met people who lost everything to a candle. One woman tried to read her Bible after sundown and fell asleep with the flame too close to the curtains. By morning, she was standing barefoot in the snow watching what used to be her house smoke into the grey dawn. She survived. Her dog didn't. The baby barely made it. That story stuck with you. Historically, candles were precious, not just for light, but as controlled sources of heat, made from tallow, rendered animal fat, or beeswax if you were rich or had hives. Tallow was cheap and easy, but smelled like cooked meat and smoked like a funeral pyre. You've used both. The beeswax ones are sweet and clean and expensive. You get maybe one a year if someone gives it as a gift or you have something rare to trade. The rest of the time, it's tallow. Lumpy, drippy and slightly offensive. And don't even get started on making them. Boiling fat, straining impurities, pouring into moulds or dipping strings one layer at a time. It's a full day affair that stinks up the entire cabin and leaves your clothes smelling like stew gone wrong. But you do it because light is life and candles are gold in winter. You guard the stash like it's medicine. You count them, you trim the wicks, you store them high, away from rats and curious children. You heard once of a man who tried to use butter as a candle in a pinch, rolled up a piece of rag, stuck it in a tin and burned it slow. It worked. Sort of. Smelled like burned popcorn and desperation, but it worked. You tried it too, one especially dark night last winter. Burned through a week's worth of fat in 2 hours. Lesson learned. There's a superstition, one of many, that says if your candle burns with a blue flame, a spirit is nearby. You've seen it once or twice, but you're more inclined to blame drafty chinks in the wall than the dead. Still, you don't say that out loud. Winter has a way of making you cautious with your words. You respect the dark out here. Even stranger, some people claimed candle flames could predict the weather. If the flame bent low, wind was coming. If it flared up bright and steady, clear skies ahead. You've watched your candle like a weather vane more than once. Maybe there's something to it, maybe not, but when you've got no barometer and no forecast, you'll take whatever signs you can get. Tonight your candle burns straight and tall. That's good, you'll take it. You're almost out of fat for another round of dipping, and the oil you hope to trade for next week, probably frozen in someone else's cabin by now. You've got a few stubs left, too short to use alone, but worth saving. You melt the ends together when you get desperate. A Frankenstein candle, ugly as sin, but still flame. There's still debate among historians about how reliant frontier families were on candles versus oil lamps versus plain old firelight. Some say candles were for the privileged, that most folks relied on the hearth and went to bed early. Others point to shipping records, thousands of pounds of tallow exported west, and argue candles were as common as cornbread. You think both can be true, you use whatever you have, sometimes that's a candle, sometimes it's the memory of one. The kids used to beg for light after dark. Story time, they'd say. Read us something, draw shadows on the wall. You indulged them when you could, carving little figures out of bark and making silhouettes on the plaster with the candle's glow. But that luxury's faded. Now the light is for finding your boots in the dark or not tripping over the cow's feed bucket. You hate that it's come to this. You hate that your children have started falling asleep with their backs to the wall, like little soldiers waiting for something to go wrong, but you understand it. Tonight, you carry your one candle across the cabin like it's made of glass. It lights your way to the bed, where your wife is already curled up with the kids. You slide under the pile of blankets, careful not to jostle the candle, and let it burn on the hearthstone. You watch the flame flicker, orange and warm, painting the walls in golden streaks. The fire's nearly out, the wind still claws at the window. But in this moment, you've got light. Soft, stubborn light. Just enough. You've learned to ignore the numbness in your feet. You go to bed with it, wake up with it, walk through the day with it, like it's part of your body now, just another layer of winter. You know you shouldn't, not really. Numbness means the blood's not reaching, that something is shutting down and that warmth is losing. But there are chores to do, and the fire needs tending, and the door latch is stuck again, and your boots feel like they've been carved from stone. So you stomp your feet once, twice, and tell yourself that's good enough, but it's not. Tonight is the kind of cold that gets into your bones and sits there like a squatter. The fire is low, and you're too tired to feed it again. You're already in bed, or something close to it, wrapped in every blanket and coat and quilt that didn't freeze stiff. But you can't feel your toes. That's the problem. You can't feel your toes, not even a little bit. You wiggle them and get nothing in return. It's like shouting into a canyon and getting no echo. You sit up, heart thudding, and fumble for the candle stub you saved. The dog lifts her head and sighs, irritated. Your wife stirs but doesn't wake. You light the wick with shaking hands and hold the tiny flame near your feet. Your boots are still on. You never took them off. You haven't taken them off in 2 days. With effort, you pull one free. It resists. Stiff with cold and damp from snowmelt that got in during yesterday's wood haul, the sock inside is frozen, more like a shell than a fabric. You peel it down slowly, bracing for what's underneath. And there they are, toes, pale and waxy, pressed together like lumps of clay. You press your thumb against the pad of the big toe and get no reaction. You do it again. Still nothing. Your stomach turns. You've seen this before, on others, not yourself. You've helped bind blackened fingers, watched old men lose chunks of ear and pretend it was nothing. You've heard them say frostbite doesn't hurt until it thaws. That's the cruel part. While it's frozen, it's just numb. But the moment you bring the blood back, the pain comes with it, like a punishment for surviving. You shuffle closer to the hearth, coaxing the embers into a whisper of flame. You don't want to burn your feet, just get them warm enough to feel something. Anything. You remember someone telling you to be careful thawing frozen skin. Slow and gentle, they said. Shock it too fast and you'll kill the flesh for good. So you move slow, you grab one of the warm bricks from under the dog, wrap it in a rag and set your foot on top. It stings immediately. A sharp, burning itch that makes you gasp. Good. Pain means life. You rotate your foot, then switch to the other one, pressing your soles against the warm brick, then covering them with your hands like you're praying. You sit there for an hour, maybe more. The cabin around you is still asleep, filled with the soft sound of breathing and the occasional crack of wood settling in the cold. You hear the wind trying to get in again, whistling through chinks in the wall you thought you'd stuffed yesterday. It's never done. The cold never stops looking for a way in. Eventually the pain comes back full force. Your feet burn like someone poured boiling water into your boots. You bite your lip to keep from crying out, not wanting to wake the family. Your eyes water, hands trembling as you rub warmth into the toes. You can't tell yet if you caught it in time. If the pain stays, maybe you did. If it fades again into numbness, well, you know what that means. There's no doctor to call, no hospital to drive to, no antibiotics, no surgery, just you, some animal fat, a few clean rags, and the constant hope that your body still wants to heal. Your wife will help in the morning if it's bad, she always does. But right now, it's just you and the fire and the stubborn will to keep your toes. There's still debate in the old records about how settlers treated frostbite effectively. Some wrapped limbs in snow to slow the thaw. Others dunked them in warm water, as warm as a hand could stand, and waited. A few tried herbal poultices, marshmallow root, yarrow, pine pitch. Whether it worked or just distracted them long enough to survive, no one agrees. One strange trick you remember reading was using candle smoke, holding frostbitten parts over a toking tallow candle to draw out the dead chill. You tried it once, years ago, just for the novelty. All it did was make your hands smell like burnt stew for 2 days. You shift your weight, rotating the bricks, gently pressing the soles of your feet against the now cooled rag. They ache, they throb. But you can wiggle them now, not well, but enough to hope. And that's what it is out here, every day. Hope in small doses, in one toe moving again, in a patch of thawed skin that stays pink, in a fire that doesn't go out. You start to put on new socks, damp but not frozen, and layer them under what passes for dry boots. You know you'll have to go out again in the morning, the cow's getting restless, and you're almost out of kindling. But for now, you pull your coat back on and slide under the quilts, tucking your feet between your wife's legs without a word. She stirs and hums, half awake. Her hands find yours, and she squeezes them just once before settling again. The dog shifts closer. The wind knocks, then retreats. You stare at the ceiling, blinking at the shadows from the candle's dying light, and whisper to yourself, "Still got all 10. For now. You start to feel the walls closing in sometime around the 3rd week without sun. It's not dramatic, no slamming doors or haunted voices, just this quiet pressure building behind your eyes. The cabin doesn't shrink, not physically, but it feels smaller. The corners get darker, the ceiling's lower, the air gets thicker, like it's been breathed too many times. You sit on the same stool you've sat on every morning for months, staring at the same knot in the floorboards, and you start wondering what it would feel like to scream until the walls cracked. Of course you don't scream, you're not crazy. You just feel like you might be soon. This is what people call cabin fever, and it's not a joke, it's not funny, it's not quirky, it's real and it's awful. Out here, trapped in one small room with the same handful of people and animals, it becomes a slow grind against your sanity. You start thinking thoughts you didn't invite. You look at your wife, chewing the end of a piece of thread, and suddenly feel like if she doesn't stop making that sound, you're going to walk straight into the snow and let the coyotes figure it out. But you don't. You shake it off, you stand up, you pace, you count to 10, you pick a fight with the door hinge because it squeaks just wrong. Anything to keep from bursting. The kids are feeling it too. They've run out of games to play. They've made towers out of every object in the house, invented songs you'd gladly forget, and played a version of tag that turned violent after someone tripped over the dog. Now they just lie around like tired puppies, poking each other out of boredom. No books left to reread, no firelight puppet shows, no energy to argue. Your wife is quieter these days, not sad exactly, just still. She stares out the small window like she's trying to see past the snow, like she's trying to remember what green looks like. You offered to play cards with her last night, and she just smiled with that thin, tired expression that says, "I can't pretend right now." You understood, you didn't press it. The cow's going stir-crazy too. She's taken to shifting her weight back and forth for hours. The rhythmic creak of her movement sounds like something groaning deep underground. She licks the wall sometimes, or your boots, or the firewood. Anything new, anything different. She's as bored and cold as the rest of you. Cabin fever isn't just restlessness, it's mental rot. You start doubting things. Did you check the fire? Did you close the barn door? Did you really hear something outside, or was it just your own breath echoing in the silence? You dream in circles, wake up unsure what day it is. Your thoughts get sticky, repeating themselves. You try to pray and forget what words come next. You find yourself whispering stories from childhood, not for comfort, but just to hear something different in your own voice. Historically, winter isolation was one of the great unspoken dangers of frontier life. The physical challenges were obvious: cold, hunger, illness, but the mental ones crept up quietly. Depression, paranoia, hysteria. People went mad out here, slowly, steadily, without fireworks. One man in Minnesota back in 1873 started dismantling his cabin board by board, convinced the walls were watching him. Another locked his family in the root cellar for 3 days because he thought the snow would turn their thoughts. There are letters, grim, terse letters, written to no one, describing dreams of Thor and screaming trees. The strangest story you ever heard was of a woman who taught her chickens to vote on household decisions during the winter. She'd ask them yes or no questions and throw grain in 2 piles. Whichever pile they pecked at more, that was the decision. She made it through the winter. The chickens didn't. Even among historians, there's debate about how much of cabin fever was reported and how much was quietly buried. Diaries mention longing or winter heaviness, but rarely go deeper. Mental health wasn't a thing you talked about. You just endured it, or you didn't. Some whispered that long winters tested the soul, that if you came out of one untouched, you hadn't really lived through it. Tonight it feels like the air itself is too thick to move. The fire is fine, the food's enough for now, but the silence is unbearable. You've already played your harmonica and listened to the dog howl. You tried telling the kids a story but got distracted halfway through, lost in your own words. Your wife knit a dozen rows and then undid them, said she didn't like the pattern. You think maybe she just wanted to feel something happen. You sit by the window for a while, looking out at nothing. The snow is still falling, light but steady, blanketing everything in sameness. You haven't seen another person in weeks. You wonder if they're all still out there, behind their own walls, staring at their own floors, thinking the same awful thoughts. The only thing that helps is routine, not comfort, just rhythm. Feed the fire, feed the cow, feed the kids, wash the dishes, chop a little wood, sit, stare, repeat. It gives the hours shape. It keeps the days from melting together into one long, colourless blur. And sometimes, just sometimes, you remember what's waiting at the end of this. The thaw, the first trickle of meltwater from the roof, the first birdsong slicing through the silence. The way the air smells different when winter loosens its grip. You hang on to that. You build a little shrine to it in your mind. Tonight, after the others are asleep, you sit by the embers and scratch a line into the wall with your knife. One more day, one more night survived. It's not dramatic, no big gesture, just a mark. You'll make another tomorrow. You've stopped asking how much food is left. The question hangs in the air every time someone opens the storage bin or lifts the lid off the barrel of flour, but no one says it out loud. You just glance at each other, do the math in your head, and press your lips together. As if not speaking, it will slow down the disappearance of the supplies. As if silence is a kind of rationing too. The truth is, you're running out. You've been running out. It started subtle, smaller portions, skipped snacks, second helpings gone to the way of summer. The bread is thinner now, mostly crust, and the stew is more water than meat. The kids don't complain, bless them. They've picked up on the atmosphere in the room, the tension every time a cupboard creaks open or a bag rustles, the way their parents hesitate before scooping their own bowls. Breakfast is a formality now, a few bites of cornbread, maybe a spoonful of beans if you're lucky. No butter, no jam, no eggs since mid-January when the chickens all but gave up out of cold and hunger themselves. You try not to let your eyes linger on the flour sack when you go to grab it, but your hand tells you what your eyes won't. It's getting too light, hollow like it's filled with air instead of meal. And then there's the salt pork, that precious last slab you keep wrapped in cloth and tucked inside a lard tin like treasure. You've shaved pieces off it so thin you could see through them, cutting with your sharpest knife and still feeling guilty. It smells strong now, too strong. You pretend that's just the curing. You don't ask it if it's turned. What else are you going to do? Not eat it? You still have some dried apples. But the kids notice the texture has gone chewy in a way that feels wrong. You wave it off. They're just cold, you say. They'll soften in stew. But you know they're past their prime. Same with the potatoes, shrivelling like old skin, eyes sprouting like stubborn weeds. You cut around the bad parts, and when the bad parts become most of it, you stew the peels instead. What's hardest is the waiting. Spring is still weeks away, even if the sun is starting to show itself again. You can hear meltwater sometimes, dripping from the eaves at noon like a promise. But that's not harvest. That's not the root cellar refilling itself. You can't eat hope, you need food, and there's not enough of it. Some people had root cellars stocked full enough to last all the way through the cold season. They planned, they measured, they preserved. You tried. You really did. But a late harvest, an early snow, and the rats that got into the dried beans knocked your supplies down by nearly a third. You didn't talk about it then, you don't talk about it now. You remember an old saying. Hunger sharpens the mind but dulls the spirit. You get it now. You're sharper, more alert, but also a little colder inside. Not from the temperature. From the constant mental math. From thinking if we run out, who gets what? You don't ask it out loud, but the question is always there. Parents eat less. That's the rule. But if things get worse, if it goes beyond less, then what? History is full of the quiet desperation of food shortages. Diaries mention lean months or the long wait. But the real stories lie in what people didn't say. They skipped entries in March and April, and you know why. It wasn't because nothing happened, it was because too much did. One record you came across described a man mixing sawdust into flour to stretch the bread. Another spoke of making coffee from roasted chicory, dandelion roots, even burnt cornbread crumbs. There's no pride in those entries, just survival. Some even tried boiling old leather shoes for soup stock. You laughed the first time you read that. You're not laughing now. There's a fringe belief, maybe more a superstition, that you should never count your food openly. It draws attention from hungry spirits, they say. Or maybe from the weather, which punishes greed with late frosts and spoiled grain. Your wife keeps the ledger closed. She hasn't tallied the stores in over a week. Not because she doesn't care, because she already knows the number in her bones. So do you. Tonight's dinner is thin stew again. You find a carrot that's half frozen but salvageable. You slice it carefully, let it float in the broth like something exotic. The kids light up like it's Christmas. You smile, pretending it's funny. They slurp it down like soup from a grand hotel. You chew slow, savouring what little salt still clings to the broth. There's no meat tonight. The pork's staying in its tin, waiting for some moment that might matter more than this one. After dinner you scrape the pot, not to clean it, to get the last bits, a smear of broth, a slice of onion skin. Your wife eats that, quietly, no fuss. You don't say anything, but you watch her do it, and it hurts in a way you can't describe. The kids fall asleep with their bellies not quite full. You and your wife stay up longer than usual, not talking, just sitting by the fire. She's sewing, but slowly. You're pretending to mend a boot that's beyond repair. You're just holding it because holding something feels better than holding nothing. At one point, she reaches over and touches your knee. Doesn't say anything. Just that one small gesture to remind you. We're still here. Together. It's enough. Tomorrow you'll have to go out and check the traps. Hope a rabbit's wandered too far from its den. Hope you didn't forget where you set them. Hope the snow hasn't buried everything you need. Until then, you close your eyes and whisper a small, simple prayer. Let there be enough. Just enough. There's a knock on the door. You freeze, literally and figuratively. It's been weeks since anyone came by. No one's that bold during a freeze this deep unless something's gone terribly wrong. Your first thought isn't hope, or help, or even curiosity. It's fear. You glance at your wife and she's already halfway to the wall where the hatchet hangs. You reach for the door slowly, your fingers already numb again, heart thudding like a pan dropped on a wooden floor. The knock comes again, slower this time, heavier. You crack the door just enough to peek through. And there, barely visible in the swirl of snow and twilight, is Henry from the ridge. His face is raw with windburn, eyes sunken, scarf frozen to his chin. His arms are wrapped around something, no, someone, a shape bundled in a coat too thin for this kind of weather. His daughter. You throw the door open without another word and the cold rushes in like a wave. Henry stumbles in behind it, gasping, carrying the girl like she weighs nothing. She's limp. Her cheeks are white as paper, lips dark. You yell for your wife and she's already clearing the bed, pushing the kids aside, dragging extra quilts down from the loft. They'd been walking for 3 hours. That's what Henry says between coughs. Left just after midday, trying to beat the storm. Their stove cracked clean through yesterday morning. No fire, no warmth, no wood. The wife stayed behind with the baby. Said Henry and the girl should go. We'll catch up, she told him. But Henry didn't believe it then. And you can see he doesn't believe it now. You don't ask questions, you just start moving. There's a second body in the cabin now, and that changes everything. You add another log to the fire even though you were trying to save it. You melt snow in the kettle, you peel the girl's boots off, her socks are wet, frozen to her skin, and begin the slow, painful work of warming her feet. She doesn't flinch. That's bad. But her chest still rises and falls. That's something. You've done this before, not often. But enough to know that community, even when half-frozen and barely surviving, is the only reason anyone makes it through winter. Out here, neighbour means something more than shared fences and friendly waves. It means shared lives, shared risks, shared logs when someone's out, shared stew when someone's hungry, shared fire when someone's fire goes out for good. You let Henry sit by the hearth and wrap himself in your coat. His hands tremble. He stares into the flames like he's afraid they're not real. You don't press him. The man's lost weight since you last saw him. His beard has frost crusted through it like a second skin. He blinks slowly, like someone half asleep or half starved. Your wife keeps working on the girl, rubbing her hands, her legs, whispering soft words that don't seem to register. The kids gather around, wide-eyed but quiet. They know not to ask questions. They've seen what cold does. There's an old saying, when the fire dies, so do the fences. In winter, property lines blur, ownership disappears. If you've got heat and someone doesn't, you share. That's not charity, it's law, unspoken but sacred. You give what you have because next time it might be you walking through the snow with a half-frozen child and nowhere else to go. Historically, frontier families often lived miles apart, separated by fields, forests, and the kind of terrain that laughed at the word road. And yet, they managed to check in on each other. In good winters, they'd take turns visiting, a mug of stew, a few songs, maybe a letter read aloud. In bad ones, they'd send their strongest walkers with word of who was down to their last log, who'd lost a roof, who hadn't come out in days. The community wove itself tighter the colder it got, but there were stories of the other kind too. Neighbours who shut their doors and never opened them again. Families who starved quietly while someone less than a mile away had food they wouldn't share. That's the dark edge of survival, the fear that if you give too much, you'll lose your own chance. That if you open your door to everyone, eventually there's nothing left for your own. You understand it, but you still open the door, because not opening it, that's something you don't come back from. There's still debate among historians whether frontier communities were more generous or more selfish in extreme winters. Some point to letters sharing stories of hand-delivered bread, community barn raisings, strangers taken in like kin. Others argue that desperation made people territorial, tight-fisted, even violent. You figure both were true depending on the person, the place, the moment. Survival isn't one size fits all. Tonight, your cabin feels overfull in the best and worst ways. Too many bodies for one fire, too many mouths for one stew pot. But the girl is breathing easier now, and Henry has stopped shaking. Your wife drapes a quilt over them both and brings them broth, one bowl at a time. Later, you'll find a way to get back to his wife. You'll take your sled, wrap up like you're heading to the edge of the world. You'll pray they're still alive, and if they are, you'll bring them back here too. You don't know where they'll sleep, maybe all of you in one pile like puppies, but you'll figure it out, because you have to. The kids are asleep again, and Henry is too, sitting upright, head against the wall. The girl's colour is coming back. She mumbles something in her sleep, maybe a name, maybe nothing. Your wife doesn't let go of her hand. The fire cracks, bright and alive, and for the first time in days. The cabin feels full of something other than cold. It feels human. It feels right. It feels like survival, together. You can always tell a bad storm by the silence that comes before it. Not the usual hush of snow drifting softly or the quiet of night. No, this is different. This is a flat, eerie stillness where even the trees seem to hold their breath. No birds, no wind, not even the creak of the cabin. Just a kind of dense, waiting quiet, like the sky itself is drawing in, ready to pounce. That's what it felt like the morning the great blizzard hit. You didn't know it would be remembered as one of the worst in living memory, that it would earn its own name in whispered stories and grim journal entries. To you, it started like any other brutal day. Stiff boots, weak coffee, frozen kindling. The snow had been falling since before dawn, light and steady. You weren't worried, not yet. Henry and his girl were still with you, curled up near the hearth like survivors clinging to the last warm spot on earth. The cabin smelled like wet wool, old stew, and the damp sweetness of thawing boots. The kids were quiet, moving slow, like they sensed what was coming even if they couldn't name it. Your wife was boiling water for the morning's thin porridge when you noticed how pale the light was. Too pale, blue-tinged, cold in a way that made your teeth ache just looking at it. You stepped outside to get more wood, and the wind slammed into you like a wall. Not a breeze, not a gust, a wall. You staggered back 2 steps before you even realised what had happened. The snow had turned sideways, blasting in sheets so thick you couldn't see the tree line just 20 feet from the cabin. The air was full of ice, not just flakes, but fine, needle-like shards that stabbed at your eyes and hissed across your skin. You dropped the wood you were holding and backed inside, slamming the door behind you with a curse. It wasn't just a storm, it was a blizzard. And not the kind that grumbles and fades after a few hours. This one was the real deal. The kind that buried towns, killed livestock in their pens, and swept travellers off the road like crumbs off a table. The kind that made legends, and you were in its path. You've read about storms like this. The schoolhouse blizzard of 1888, they called it. The one that caught children on their way home from school and froze them standing up in the snow. They say the temperature dropped 50 degrees in minutes. People suffocated a foot from their own doors because they couldn't find them. Whole families vanished into the drifts before they could light a second candle. Suddenly, your patchy walls and dwindling fire didn't seem like your biggest problems anymore. You shoved furniture against the doors, nailed shut every seam you could find, and piled quilts over the windows like your life depended on it, because it did. The wind was relentless, a banshee clawing at the house, whistling through the cracks, rattling the very bones of the place. You could hear things hitting the roof, branches maybe, or shingles torn from someone else's home, riding the gale like deadly paper planes. Inside, the cabin felt like a lifeboat in a frozen sea. Your wife stayed calm, which made you calm. She kept the children close, gathered the extra blankets, made sure the fire was fed constantly, even if it meant burning the extra stool. Henry helped too, mostly by not panicking. His daughter didn't say a word. She just watched the walls like she expected them to burst open at any second. For the next 30 hours, the blizzard didn't let up. Day and night blurred into a single cold blur. Time became meaningless. You measured it in logs burned, and how many times the wind made the back wall creak like it might split open. The strangest thing about a blizzard is how loud it is. You'd think snow would muffle sound, but not this. The wind howled non-stop like some great beast was circling the house, hungry and frustrated. The snow lashed the cabin like whipcords. Sometimes the pressure dropped so low your ears popped. Other times it felt like the storm itself was pressing down on the roof, daring it to collapse. You took turns sleeping. Someone always stayed awake to tend the fire, to listen, to check for new leaks or structural groans. The dog didn't sleep at all. She sat upright, alert, ears twitching every time the wind shifted. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Late on the second night, the wind cut off mid-howl like someone threw a switch. The silence was so abrupt it felt unnatural. You all sat there, eyes wide, waiting for the next gust. But it didn't come, just silence. You were the first to open the door, cautiously, as if the blizzard might still be crouching outside like a beast with breath held. But when the door creaked open, what greeted you was nothing but white. Not snow falling, just snow everywhere. The world was gone, buried. The drifts had swallowed the fence, the trees were half missing. You couldn't see the trail to the barn, you couldn't even see where the path had been. It looked like the world had been erased. You stepped into the snow and sank to your thigh. There are people who don't believe the stories, that snow could cover houses, bury animals alive, choke off entire communities for weeks. But you know better. You lived it, and you know the worst part isn't the snow itself, it's the aftermath. Now comes the digging, the checking, the silence of wondering who else made it. Did the Petersons down the hill survive? Did the Thompsons with the baby have enough firewood? Did someone try to leave their cabin halfway through and lose the path? You won't know until the snow melts, or until someone finds them. But for now, you pull the door closed again. The fire's still going, the cabin's still standing, you made it through. Not everyone will. The medicine shelf is nearly bare now. What's left fits in a small wooden box the size of a shoebox. A cracked bottle of laudanum that's thickened like molasses. A few crusted cloths wrapped around dried herbs that smell like musty hay. Half a jar of goose grease, 3 curls of willow bark. And a spoon so blackened from soot it looks more like a threat than a tool. It's not much, but it's all you've got. Out here, when winter hits hard and sickness rolls in behind it, you don't have a doctor. You have what you can make, what you can trade, or what someone once swore would work if the moon was right. The baby's coughing again. It's not bad yet, but you can hear the rattle building in her chest. Your wife keeps her upright against her shoulder, rocking gently, whispering the same soft words over and over, like they can soothe more than just nerves. You've already tried the basics, steamed up the cabin with boiling water, slathered her chest with the goose grease, even crumbled the last dried onion, and wrapped it in warm rags across her feet. All the old tricks, all the old beliefs, none of them have stopped that cough. You'd kill for a lemon, for fresh garlic, for one of those thick, oily poultices the town doctor used to mix up in his back room before he moved away. But you have none of that. You have onions, grease, a bit of whiskey, and hope. And hope doesn't fight infection. You chew on a strip of willow bark and spit the bitter taste onto the floor. It's supposed to help with fever. Doesn't do much for babies, but your knee's been throbbing since you slipped during the blizzard and landed hard. That fall could have been worse. You keep telling yourself that. You didn't break anything. You didn't bleed. You just ache, deep and slow, like the pain is woven into your bones. Your wife sends you out for snow to melt, and you take the excuse gratefully. It's not just about the water. It's about the air, the quiet, the cold biting at your face, reminding you that you're still here, still alive, still moving. You scoop the snow from a drift. Not the top layer, but deep down where it's cleaner, untouched by ash or dust. Your fingers go numb through the cloth, but you keep going. Back inside, you melt the snow, pour the water over a pinch of dried mint, and try to coax a tea from it. The mint is barely recognizable anymore. Faded color, brittle texture. You can't remember where you got it. Someone traded it for eggs, maybe, before the hens gave up laying. It smells faintly of something pleasant. Summer, you think? Maybe laughter? You serve it warm and weak, in a cup with a crack running down the side. The baby drinks a few sips. She's quiet now, eyes fluttering, sweat purling on her forehead in tiny beads. You wipe them away with the corner of your sleeve, hoping it's just the tea and not something worse. There's a quiet understanding out here, among families like yours, that winter illness is a game of chance. Some years you get lucky, just colds and sniffles, nothing serious. Other years it takes someone, and not always the weak. Sometimes it's the strongest man in the house, felled by a cough that never leaves. Sometimes it's the toddler who seemed fine until her breath came shallow and short. There's no pattern, no reason. Just the roulette wheel of frontier life. In towns, they used to hold curing circles, groups of women who'd meet in kitchens and compare remedies, pass around tallow candles with pins stuck in them, stir potions in borrowed kettles. Out here, you're alone with your box of half-remembered knowledge. You know chamomile if you see it. You know how to boil pine needles for vitamin C, though the taste makes your stomach turn. You know a handful of plants and a handful of prayers. You remember a neighbour, old Martha, who once swore that whiskey mixed with black pepper and honey would cure any cough in 3 days. You tried it once for yourself, it burned like hell and didn't cure a thing, but you fell asleep faster, which in its own way was a cure. You don't have honey anymore, but you still have a few fingers of whiskey. Not much. You've been saving it for a true emergency. Is this it? Your wife catches you eyeing the bottle and gives a slight shake of her head. Not yet. Not today. There's another remedy, old and a little wild, that you've only ever heard in whispers. Burning dried horse dung in the corner of the room to chase off the fever spirits. Supposedly the smell was so bad it scared sickness out of the body. You're not that desperate yet, but you've started looking at the straw pile differently. Even scholars still argue over whether these winter cures helped or hurt. Some remedies were clearly nonsense, passed down like superstition. Others had a kind of primitive wisdom to them. Herbs we now know have antibacterial properties, teas that soothed inflammation, oils that opened up lungs. But out here, in this cold, none of that matters unless you have the thing when you need it. You could be sitting on a miracle plant and not even know it if no one ever taught you how to use it. The baby's sleeping now, breath a little easier. That's all you need for tonight. You'll check her again in an hour, then again before you sleep. Your wife won't sleep at all. You can already see it in her face, the long stare, the way her hand never stops moving against the child's back, counting breaths like there's the last money in her pocket. You feed the fire again. It eats another log greedily, and the warmth pulses back into the room. You glance at your medicine box, still cracked open on the shelf, contents barely disturbed. You've done what you can. Now it's up to the body, up to the fire, up to the night. You hear the story again while sitting on the floor near the fire, whittling a sliver of kindling down to nothing just to give your hand something to do. Henry's the one telling it, low voice, eyes half-lidded, speaking like he's remembering something from a lifetime ago. They say if your shadow disappears in a snowstorm, you're already dead. You glance up, meet his eyes, and wait for the punchline. There isn't one. Just the creak of the fire and the soft, shifting weight of the cold pressing against the walls. These are the myths of winter. The strange, half-true stories that come out when the sun disappears for too long and everyone's been trapped together just a few days past their breaking point. You all start telling tales to fill the silence, to keep the fear at bay, to pass the time. Some are warnings, some are nonsense, some, deep down, you suspect are true. The shadow myth is one you've heard before. Supposedly, if you go outside and can't find your shadow, it means the cold has already claimed you. You're just a walking ghost. It makes no sense scientifically, but on a cloudy, storm-heavy day, when the light is wrong and the snow reflects everything in flat white, well, you've looked for your shadow and not found it. And for one sharp, breathless second, you did feel like maybe the myth had something to it. There's another tale about the ice whisperers, spirits of the cold that sneak into your dreams and convince you to walk outside out in the middle of the night. They don't kill you, they just whisper reasons why the cold won't hurt, why it's fine to lie down in the snow and rest your eyes. The wind is their voice, people twisty. That soft moaning under the eaves, that's not the wind, it's an invitation. You laugh at it in daylight. But at 3 a.m, when you wake with frozen fingers and feel the cold nibbling at your spine, you remember it. You remember it hard. Your kids have their own winter legends. They whisper about blue men who live in the drifts and only come out when it's below 0. They say if you fall asleep in the snow, the blue men carry you off to live underground, where the cold is so deep it turns your bones to glass. Where do they hear these things? Probably from other kids. Or maybe if they make it up together, spinning folklore the way their parents spin yarn. You don't stop them, let them have their monsters. At least those can be named. Even adults aren't immune. There's a long-standing belief in these parts that if you burn pine needles on the last day of the year, you can smoke out the frost demons hiding in the corners of your home. Your wife does it every year, muttering under her breath as the smoke curls into the beams. You smile, roll your eyes, but you don't stop her. because last winter, the neighbour who didn't do it got sick in February and never recovered. Coincidence? Sure, but winter makes you cautious, it makes you superstitious. Then there's the oldest myth, the one no one really talks about unless it's late and the fire's low. The one about the winter that never ends. It starts as a year like any other. Snow falls, the river freezes, people prepare. But then spring doesn't come, the ice stays, the sun returns for just minutes a day, and slowly, one by one, people stop checking the calendar, stop counting the days, the seasons collapse, the land forgets warmth, and those still alive become part of the cold. You've read old journals that mention it, almost like a passing thought. Another long march. Still no thaw. Beginning to wonder if the year will break at all. It's ridiculous. But some nights, when you can't remember the last time you saw the ground, when you've burned through half your supplies and are rationing matches like gold, it doesn't feel so far-fetched. Winter has a way of rewriting time, of making you wonder if maybe this is the year the wheel sticks and just never turns again. Historians debate whether these stories had any real impact, if they were just folklore, or if they shaped how frontier families saw the cold. Some argue that they served a purpose, cautionary tales to keep people from doing dumb things like wandering off in blizzards. Others think they were just mental bandages, ways to explain suffering without calling it what it was, because it's easier to say the ice demons took someone than to admit they gave up. You've never admitted to believing any of them, not out loud, but when the fire dies too low, and you're alone by the hearth listening to the wind thread itself through the chimney like a voice, you hold your breath just in case. Tonight, after the kids fall asleep, you sit with Henry and your wife in silence. No one wants to say it, but everyone's thinking about the neighbour, Martha, the one who hasn't been seen since the blizzard. No tracks from her cabin, no smoke from the chimney. You plan to check on her when the snow softens, if the cold lets up, but it's been 5 days already. You all know what that probably means. Your wife tells the story of a man who built a house so tight the cold couldn't get in, and neither could spring. He died in a perfectly preserved room, surrounded by warmth he had sealed in too well. It's nonsense, but you listen anyway. You listen and nod and stoke the fire like the flames are your last line of defence against something older than weather. You glance toward the window. Frost has feathered across the oiled paper like a handprint. The myths aren't real, you remind yourself, not in the way people say. But winter doesn't care about truth. It only cares that you believe in something. You've never been especially religious, not in the way some folks are, the kind who build their entire day around prayers and psalms, or who cross themselves every time the wind shifts. You were raised on a few Bible verses and an understanding that God helps those who help themselves, preferably after chopping wood and milking the cow. But winter changes things. It scrapes you down until you're raw, and suddenly you're reaching for something bigger than a kettle of thawed snow and a pile of damp wool. Something old, something deep, something that listens. At first, it's little things, muttering a quick prayer before heading out into a storm, or whispering thanks over a stew pot that's somehow stretched enough to feed everyone. You don't tell anyone. It's private, like checking the trapline or reading old letters, but then you catch your wife doing the same. She presses her fingers to the baby's forehead and says something in Norwegian you don't recognise. You don't ask what it means. It's not for you. It's between her and whatever part of the world still feels sacred. And out here, everything gets sacred eventually. The fire, the bread, a warm brick under your Fornia feet. All of it becomes holy in its own way. You don't need a steeple or stained glass. You've got snow-covered fields and skies that open up into forever. When you kneel to fix a leak in the roof and the wind howls like a living thing overhead, you feel small in a way that has nothing to do with weakness. You feel placed, like a piece of something ancient, even if that something is indifferent. That's what winter does. It brings out the old rituals, the ones buried deep under layers of practicality. Your grandmother used to hang garlic over the door just in case. Against what, you were never sure, spirits, illness, or the mailman. She said it with a wink, but she did it every year without fail. Now you catch your wife tying bits of red thread around the bedposts. For warmth, she says. You nodded like it's normal. Because maybe it is. Folklore and faith go hand in hand out here. One keeps your hands moving. The other keeps your spirit from snapping in half. On Christmas Eve you all sang just a few songs, the ones you remembered. Silent Night was off-key, and the baby cried halfway through. But for a moment, the whole cabin felt full, Not just of people, but of peace. Like something warm settled in just long enough to remind you of why you were trying so hard to keep going. You think maybe that's what prayer is. Not words, but attention. Choosing to believe that the flame you're guarding means more than heat. That the food you divide means more than calories. Some nights you read aloud from the worn old Bible in the corner, the one with a cracked spine and your mother's handwriting in the margins. You don't always understand the verses, but it doesn't matter. It's the rhythm, the repetition. The sound of something solid in a world that keeps shifting beneath your feet. Henry brought a charm with him when he arrived. A small wooden cross carved from ash, strung with twine and something that might be bone. He says his grandfather made it. He doesn't say what it's for, but you notice he hangs it near the door every night, just before bed, facing north. You've asked him about it once, and he just shrugged. It keeps the worst things out, he said. You didn't press, you let him keep doing it, and when he forgets, you do it for him. The children ask questions sometimes. Why is God letting it be so cold? Why did the Martha disappear? Will spring come back, or is the world stuck like this? You don't have answers. You offer them the same words your father used to say, God's listening, even if he's quiet. Sometimes they believe you. Sometimes they fall asleep before they can decide. There's an old belief passed down through the German side of the family that winter is a test, not of strength, but of gratitude. That the ones who survive are the ones who thank the cold for teaching them to notice the warmth. It sounds like something you'd find in a poem, not real life. But when you're sitting close to the hearth, holding a mug of hot tea made from pine needles, and your wife is snoring softly beside you, you understand it. You don't like the cold, but you understand it. You've heard stranger ideas too. A Czech neighbour once told you that every fire needs a name, or else it doesn't burn true. She named hers Bohumil. You've never named yours, but sometimes you catch yourself talking to it, urging it to live, begging it not to die out overnight. That's not prayer in the traditional sense, maybe, but it's still faith. Faith in heat, faith in light. Faith that if you give it enough, it'll give something back. And sometimes when everything's gone quiet, kids asleep, wife dozing, fire low, you feel something else. Not warmth exactly, not presence, but a kind of stillness that feels attentive, like the cabin itself is listening, like the night is waiting for you to speak. And maybe that's the moment when you finally do. Not out loud, just a whisper inside your ribs. Something like, please let this be enough. Let them stay warm. Let spring come. You don't expect a reply, but you do feel a little better. Tonight before sleep, you wrap the baby in one more blanket, kiss her forehead, and whisper the only prayer you've never forgotten. Keep us safe. And somehow, saying it still matters. There's a sound children make in winter that doesn't happen any other time of year. It's not a laugh, not exactly. More like a squeal, a high, sharp squeak that bursts out when something is both exciting and freezing cold. You hear it again this morning, and for a moment, it knocks you out of your own thoughts. You glance up from the woodpile, expecting trouble, and instead see your youngest halfway buried in a snowbank, boots kicking, cheeks flushed pink with life. He's not crying. He's thrilled. You don't get it, until you do. Winter, through a child's eyes, is a completely different season. It's not about rationing, it's not about frostbite or firewood or the quiet dread of February hunger. It's magic. It's snow falling in silence. It's icicles hanging like swords. It's breath clouds that make you feel like a dragon. It's the way the world softens, slows, and turns into something out of a fairy tale. Dangerous? Sure. But fairy tales were always dangerous too. Your eldest is carving shapes into the frost on the window pane. Lazy spirals, then stars, then what might be a rabbit if you squint. She hums to herself, a melody with no words. It's the third morning in a row you've caught her doing it. You haven't asked what the song is, maybe she doesn't know either. You let her keep humming. Her breath fogs the glass, erasing the artwork a few seconds after each stroke. The baby's better today, still pale, still quiet, but her eyes track the firelight, and her fingers curl when she sleeps. Your wife holds her like she's made of glass, like she could slip away if not cradled just right. But she's here. Still here. You're all still here. And the kids, well, they've adapted better than you ever thought possible. Children are resilient in a way that feels borderline supernatural. They bounce back from frostbitten fingers. They invent games from wood scraps and straw. They find wonder in the smallest things. Patterns of ice on the window, the way the kettle whistles. how shadows stretch long across the floor in the early dark. They don't care that dinner's thin, or that you're wearing the same shirt 5 days in a row. They just want to build a fort behind the stove and pretend they're hiding from frost giants. They laugh more often than you'd expect. Big belly laughs, snorts and wheezes that fill the cabin with echoes. Once, you slipped on your own boots and landed flat in the snow, and they howled like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. You were wet, cold and bruised, but their laughter made it worth it. You're still not sure if that's parenting or just survival in disguise, but it's not always easy. There are days when they cry from hunger, but don't say it out loud. They just curl up under the quilt, faces turned away. There are nights when they wake from dreams and say things like, "Where did the green go?" Or, "When will the ground come back?" And there's nothing you can do but pull them close and hum whatever lullaby still lingers in your memory. Sometimes you see their joy and feel something strange. Guilt, maybe, or envy. You wish you could see what they see. An adventure, not a struggle. A world of snowsuit castles and frost-painted dragons. You miss that kind of vision. You miss being surprised by beauty instead of bracing for loss. There's a strange fact you once read, that kids on the frontier had stronger lungs because they spent more time outside, even in freezing temperatures. Some scientists argue it's nonsense, but others swear it's true. Tougher immune systems, stronger resistance to cold, even fewer allergies, maybe because they didn't have a choice. Or maybe because they were always moving, laughing, living. You see it in your own children, the way they run through snowdrifts like they're invincible, shouting at the wind as if it's a game. And then there's the storytelling. At night, the cabin becomes a theatre. Shadows stretch long, and the fire flickers just enough to make the walls seem like a stage. Your youngest begs for stories. Tell the one about the snow witch again, or what about the cave bear with the frozen heart? You make them up as you go, layering bits of truth with just enough magic to keep their eyes wide. Your wife joins in sometimes, weaving old folk tales from her childhood, ones with talking birds and clever wolves and bread that never runs out. One night, your middle child interrupts with a new story of her own. It's about a family trapped in a house made of ice and how they dug tunnels to find the sun again. She tells it with full confidence, no hesitation, inventing characters on the spot. You listen, amazed. You want to write it down, but you don't. You just let it live in the room, melting slowly into the warmth of that night. Even in all this cold, this closeness, this scraping of survival, your children are becoming something beautiful. They'll remember the games, not the hunger. The snow angels, not the frostbite. The laughter more than the silence. Maybe one day they'll tell their own children stories about the long winter and how their parents made it all seem okay. Or maybe they'll forget the details and just remember the warmth, the safety, the way you held them close by the fire and whispered, "It's all right, we're safe, you're warm, sleep." You watch them now, playing with a strip of cloth and pretending it's a treasure map. Their boots squeak across the floor. The baby stirs in her sleep and sighs. You stoke the fire again, smile to yourself, and whisper the first honest thing you've felt all week. They're going to be okay. Maybe better than okay. Maybe stronger than you ever were. The first time you hear it, it sounds like something breaking, sharp, sudden, and wrong. You sit up straight, heart punching against your ribs, expecting the worst. A beam cracking, the roof buckling, the fire collapsing in on itself. But it's not that. It's the sound of water dripping. Just one drop at first. Then another. Then another. Rhythmic, relentless. You glance toward the window, and that's when you see it. The slow, steady melt tracing lines through the frost on the inside of the glass. It's beginning. The thaw. You almost don't believe it at first. The snow hasn't gone anywhere. Still piled high against the cabin, still heavy on the roof, still covering the trail like icing on a stale cake. But there's something different about the air. It smells wet. Not frozen wet, but soft wet, like the inside of a root cellar, muddy, alive. You crack the door and stick your face out, squinting into the early morning haze. The wind is still biting, but the sharp edge is gone. What hits your skin is damp and full of promise spring is coming. But before you get excited, you remember, this part is worse in its own way. Because the thaw doesn't bring relief, it brings rot. Everything that froze solid in winter is now slowly turning. The potatoes in the cellar, the last of the carrots, the leftover bits of salt pork in the crock. What once kept safely in the cold now starts to bloom with soft white fuzz or sour into mush. You've spent the past few months preserving everything you could. Now you watch it all unpreserve in real time. There's no way to stop it. You can slow it, maybe, shift things to cooler corners, eat what you can while it's still good. But the loss is inevitable. And then there's the smell. At first it's faint, just a hint of sourness behind the wood smoke and wool. But as the hours pass, it deepens, thickens, damp fabric, spoiled root vegetables, the tang of mildew crawling up from the floorboards. You try to air the place out, but there's nowhere for the smell to go. It sinks into everything. Your clothes, your blankets, your own skin. You find yourself craving the crispness of midwinter again. At least then everything stayed frozen in place. At least then the walls didn't sweat. The ground outside, once frozen hard as stone, begins to give way. The first few steps into the yard turn your boots into anchors. The snow doesn't crunch anymore. It sucks. You sink, you slide, you swear under your breath and grab for the porch railing to keep upright. The drifts are still waist deep in some places. But now they're hollowing underneath, collapsing like bad lungs. One wrong step and you're in up to your hip with snow packed into your boots and up your sleeves. This is the season of injury, when things look safe but aren't. When the ice on the stream cracks beneath your feet without warning. When the sled you used all winter suddenly slides too fast on wet snow and smashes into a tree. When you try to chop wood and your axe slips, biting into soft, muddy ground, and nearly into your own foot. It's also the season of floods. The first serious thaw brings rivers that didn't exist before. Meltwater pools in low spots, runs in wild ribbons down the hillside, seeps through the floorboards of the barn. You scramble to dig channels, to guide the water away from the cabin, away from the cellar, away from the precious dry things that survive the cold. You work until your hands are blistered and your boots leak. And still the water comes. The cow slips in the muck and bruises her leg. Henry's daughter gets a cough again from the damp. One of your children walks in with soaked feet and doesn't say a word about it until their toes are nearly blue again. You almost lose your temper, but you don't. You just take off their socks and start rubbing. And here's the cruelest part. Spring looks like salvation, but it's really just another test. Because now the world wants more from you. It wants labour. It wants movement. It wants all the strength you have left after surviving the long stillness. You need to mend fences, clean tools, break ground, patch the roof, dig out the garden. You need to be ready to plant, to hunt, to trade. And you need to do it all with a body that still aches from winter, a pantry that's nearly empty, and a fire that doesn't burn as long or as hot now that everything's damp. Historically, this was the time when many families didn't make it. Not during the deep cold, but right after it. When illness flared up. When malnourishment caught up. When supplies ran out just days before the first crops could be planted. There are stories of families who held on through January only to starve in March. Some scholars call it spring hunger. Others call it the grey season. Either way, it's real. And yet, there are signs. Small ones, encouraging ones. A bird call at dawn, just one, but loud, unmistakable. You don't even try to identify it. You just stand there on the porch, ankle deep in meltwater, listening like it's the first music you've ever heard. A sprig of green poking up near the edge of the barn. Could be weeds. Could be the first brave tip of wild onion. Either way, it feels like a victory. You bend down and touch it, just to be sure you're not imagining it. Your wife opens the windows for the first time in months. The breeze that rolls in is wet, heavy, and not exactly pleasant. But it's movement. It's new. It pushes the stale air out and brings with it the smell of soil. And when the children see the snowbanks shrinking, they run. Not far, not fast, but they run. Laughing, slipping, boots splashing through brown puddles. They chase each other around the same patch of exposed grass for 20 minutes like it's an amusement park. You stand at the edge of the yard and watch them. The sun is warm on your face just barely, but it's enough. You close your eyes and let it sit there. Right between your eyebrows, like a kiss from something older than the sky. You're not safe yet, but you're close. Closer than you've been in months. And that counts for something, so here you are, the final stretch. The last chapter of winter's long, brutal test. And now the real question hangs in the air. Would you have made it? You lean against the doorway of your tired, sagging cabin, staring out across a world that's still half buried in snow but beginning to slouch toward life again. The wind is warmer, but it still has teeth. The sky is brighter but not trustworthy, and you, standing there in your patch coat and your too thin boots, are alive, somehow. But surviving and living aren't always the same thing. You start to count. Not just your children's, not just your dwindling supplies or the traps you've checked 3 times already, but everything. How many logs are left? How many nails you didn't use? How many spoons of lard remain in the jar? How many times you caught yourself almost giving up and didn't? How many nights you sat awake listening for signs the roof might crack, the fire might go out, or someone might not wake up in the morning? You remember the worst days like bruises, still tender when pressed. The blizzard, the frozen toes, the sickness. The night the dog wouldn't stop growling at the window and you sat up with a knife in your lap, heart galloping. And that long, heavy silence in the middle of February, when it felt like time had folded in on itself and winter was all there would ever be. But you also remember the good moments, the ones you didn't expect. The stew that stretched farther than you thought it could. The moment the baby opened her eyes after days of worrying she wouldn't. The kids building a snow tunnel so elaborate you half considered moving in. Your wife humming an old lullaby while darning socks, as if the sound alone could hold the house together. Maybe it did. And now it's spring, or the beginning of it anyway. The calendar says so, even if the land isn't fully convinced. You've seen 2 robins. The stream behind the barn is running again, muddy and loud. The mud smells like life, thick and wild and unfiltered. You take deep breaths of it like it's medicine. But with the thaw comes the reckoning. Henry's wife didn't make it. You found her after the melt, just inside the cabin wrapped in blankets, the baby still clutched in her arms. The child was gone too. You buried them under the first tree you could find that wasn't frozen to the core. Henry didn't cry, not then, but he sat with them until dark, said something you didn't hear, then came back to your cabin and didn't speak for 3 days. Martha did survive, barely. She'd been snowed in, her chimney blocked, the fire gone out. She'd eaten dry oats straight from the sack and melted snow over a candle until her hands blistered. When you found her, she was sitting in a chair in the middle of her cabin, staring at the wall, humming a hymn with no tune. You brought her back. She hasn't said much, but she's eating again, that's something. And you, how did you fare? Well, you still have your fingers. Your toes, too, if a little purple at the tips. You lost weight, more than you care to admit. Your hands shake sometimes when you wake up. But you made it. Your family made it. The baby's stronger now, the dog's thinner but wagging again. The roof held, the fire lived. So would you have survived the winter? Yes, but just barely. And only because you never did it alone. It took everything you had. And then some. It took the last jar of beans, the favour from your neighbour, the prayers whispered into darkness. The old stories you told the children even when your throat was raw. It took your hands, blistered from splitting frozen wood, and your back, strained from lifting a sodden cow that slipped in the muck. It took silence and sacrifice and all the small unglamorous choices you made 100 times a day to keep everyone going. It took humility too, the kind you don't think about until you're out of salt and chewing pine needles for vitamins. Until you're thanking your wife for saving the baby with nothing more than a boiled rag and a heartbeat. Until you're apologising to your children for the sourness of the stew and they just smile and say it tastes like summer. There's no prize at the end of it, no medal, no cheering crowd, just this moment, standing in mud, squinting at the horizon, your breath still visible but thinner now, lighter. You can hear birds, you can see the ground, you can feel the sun on your neck. And for the first time in months you start to believe that this might end, that you might plant something, that you might laugh again without it sounding like defiance, that you might be allowed to rest, not just between chores, but really rest. Eat without counting spoonfuls, sleep without fear of the fire dying. Step outside without layering on every scrap of wool you own. Soon there will be other challenges. Spring floods, planting late, hungry animals, new debts. But that's not tonight's worry. Tonight, you sit with your family around a fire that doesn't have to be watched quite so closely. You listen to the wind, not howling, but rustling, stirring the thawed trees. You hold a cup of tea that still tastes like boiled roots but doesn't matter, because it's warm and it's yours. You lean back, close your eyes, and let your shoulders drop for the first time in months. Winter didn't win. You did. And not just because you endured it, but because you made it human. And now the cabin is quiet, not with fear or tension, but with the stillness that comes after. After the fire has been fed for the night, after the last dish has been scraped clean, after the children's breathing slows in the loft above, outside the last crust of snow glows faintly under a moon you haven't seen in weeks. And for once you're not watching it with dread. You're just watching. You stretch your legs. The ache is still there, but it's the ache of effort, not survival. The kind that says you've done something hard and made it through. Your wife's asleep in her chair, the baby curled on her chest like a cat. Her mouth is slightly open, a soft little snore rising and falling like waves on a springtime creek. You think about how close it all came, how many days you scraped by on a sliver of hope and the heel of a loaf, how many hours passed with breath held, praying the wind wouldn't shift, that no one would fall sick, that the last candle would burn a little longer. And yet, here you are. You look at the fire, small, steady, faithful, and feel a kind of quiet pride. You didn't just survive the cold, you made it mean something. You held your family together with wool and willpower, with dried apples and lullabies, with stories told in the dark and hands held through silence. Spring will come, it always does, but winter leaves its mark, in the way you move, in the way you notice warmth, in the way you treasure enough. So now, close your eyes. Let the world be quiet around you. You made it. Rest.